Good morning, everyone, and can I welcome you to the meeting of Development Control Committee A at Mid-Suffolk District Council. I'm just going to run through, first of all, some domestic arrangements. Can I just ask, please, that you make sure that microphones are turned off when you're not speaking, and can I ask, please, that if you are speaking or wish to speak, but do not interrupt other speakers or hold separate conversations while there is a speaker. If you are attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Can I just ask everyone to just double check your mobile phones are on silent or switched off? And if you have a laptop open, could I ask you to turn the volume down so we don't have pings every time emails come in? We will be using e-voting for this meeting on the modern.gov app. So could I ask members just to make sure you are logged in and ready to use the app, please? I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live on the internet and will be capable of repeated viewings. The whole of the meeting will be recorded except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you'll be deemed by the Council to have consented to being recorded. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you're also consenting to being recorded by the Council and to the possible use of those sound recordings for webcasting and/or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and press are not lawfully excluded. If you do hear the fire alarm today, can you please leave the building immediately via the fire exit and make your way to the assembly point at Ipswich Town Football Club. Follow the signs directing you to the fire exits at the end of each floor. Please do not enter the atrium, the ground floor area and walkways. And if you are in the atrium when the alarm sounds, please follow the signs to the nearest fire exit. Do not use the stairs or lifts. Please do not re-enter the building till we're told it is safe to do so. Okay, so there may be some members of the public who have not been to a planning meeting before at Mid-Suffolk District Council. So my name is Matthew Hicks. I'm one of the councillors with my colleagues here on my left who will make a decision on the applications before us today. At Mid-Suffolk District Council, the local member may speak on an application, but may not vote on the application, which is why John Field's sitting over there, and he will have an opportunity to speak but not vote. In the room, we have the Chief Planning Officer, Philip Isbell, the Area Planning Manager, Gemma Walker, the Legal Advisor, Ian Deprez, Case Officer, Bron Curtis will be coming to the meeting via Teams to present the application. We will later on have the Health Environment Officer, and we have Governance Officers Claire Philpott, Alyssa Norman and Patrick Richardson Todd in the room as well. And Councillor Byrne, as the ward member for the second application, will be joining us for that item. So I'm now going to move on to the agenda. Apologies for absence and substitutions, please.
None received, Chair.
Lovely, thanks very much. To receive any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests and other registrable non-registrable interest by members, do we have any to declare? None received. Thank you. Declarations of lobbying. I've been lobbied on the first application. Is that and the second? Okay. So that's across the board. Thank you. Any declarations of personal site visits by members? None. Thank you. The minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of January. We just got one change to them. Claire, hand over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So section 75.1 has been corrected to include Councillor Mansell's name, and that's been updated in the paper printed copy. Thank you.
Okay, is there anything else apart from that one change that anyone wishes to raise? No. So can I have a proposer for the accuracy of the minutes? Councillor Mayor and a seconder. Councillor Passmore, thank you. Governance Officer will now conduct an electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members, that vote should now be showing in progress. Thank you, Chair. So as you've confirmed vote for, that's 5 votes for and 3 abstentions. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, move on to the next item, which is to receive notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme. Are there any?
None received, Chair.
Okay, so we'll move straight on to the schedule of planning applications. We've got two before us today. We'll stay in the same order as they are in the agenda. So the first item, we'd like to bring in the case officer. Good morning. So it's the land to the south of Church Farm, Somersham, and the land to the east of Channel Birstall, and we'll hand over to the case officer.
Morning, Chair, Councillors, thank you very much. Okay, so this first application is for a solar farm with battery storage development. You'll see on this first slide that there's two application numbers, and that's because the site itself crosses the administrative boundary between Mid Suffolk and Baber District Councils, and I'll show you that in more detail as we go through the slides. Next slide, please. So the site area is this sort of Y-shaped area of agricultural land comprising of 3 parcels of land with an access from Churchill Birstall, and the zigzaggy orange line on the right there is an underground cable route connecting the development to the National Grid substation at Bullen Lane, which you can just see on the right hand side, the picture there. Next slide, please. This is the very basic slide showing the application site outlined in red. Next slide, please. And a bit more detail of constraints here. You can see that the entire site is within a locally designated special landscape area for both the Mid Suffolk Local Plan Policy CL2 and for the Baber Local Plan, their Policy CR04. You can see that the Bullen Lane bridleway passes across the southern portion of the site where the access is, travelling from east to west. There's also a footpath right-of-way which leaves that bridleway along the eastern boundary of the site, travelling north and then turning slightly west and joining the channel on the northern side of the site. It passes between fields 5 and 6, which I'll show you the numbering in a moment, and then alongside the edge of field 4 before falling back to the channel. You can also see the flood zones associated with Flowton Brook, which adjoins the site on the western side along with the Channel Highway. So the channel forms part of the western and northern boundary of the site, though the road actually curves round. So I'll try and tell you when you're seeing images whether you're looking from the channel on the western side or the northern side. Next slide, please. This slide shows you the administrative boundary between Baber and Mid Suffolk. So you can see that the area that falls within Mid Suffolk is field 4, which is on the northern side of the site. It accounts for approximately 25% of the site, and you can see that also parts of the cable route, the undergrounded cable route, go into Mid Suffolk as well. The colouring within the site also shows you the agricultural land classification of the land. So the blue area is grade 2, the dark green area is grade 3A, and the light green area is grade 3B. So for the purposes of planning policy, the MPPF and your local plan policy CL11, the grade 2 and grade 3A are best and most versatile agricultural land. So within the parcel of land, excluding the cable route corridor, the parcel of land that will see the development in Mid Suffolk, so about 25% of the overall site, that area is approximately 7.7 hectares. And of that, all of the land, as you can see, is best and most versatile. And the proportions are approximately 33% grade 2, 67% 3A. So just so you have that detail on BMV. Next slide, please. This slide shows you a bit more detail of the local designation of the SLA. So you can see the green is the designation for policy CR04 in the Baber local plan. You have policy CL2, which designates SLAs across our district, but there is a section in the topic paper for that policy which recognises the value of the landscape around the area of Flowton, and so you have this little extra pocket of SLA which extends the designation for Baber effectively. It's recognising that it sits within the same landscape. So you're not seeing any visual difference, obviously, between the districts. Next slide, please. I've included this slide for you so that you can see both the evolution of this application, and you can also see some of the other proposals that are considered as part of the cumulative impact assessment of this application. This application has been screened as EIA development on the basis of the potential for cumulative effects with other developments within the locality. The application, when it first came in, was the extent of the red line site that you're considering this morning, that Y-shaped land to the centre bottom of this slide, but it also included the land shown outlined in dashed purple at the top of the slide. So it included access close to the community centre at Somersham and some areas around Flowton as well. So those parcels of land have now been excluded from the scheme following some of the consultation exercises and the feedback from community and technical consultees. So what you're now looking at is just the Y-shaped parcel towards the bottom of this slide. Also shown on this image, you can see the red cross-hatched areas of land. That is the extent of an application site for the Grey Barn solar farm. That is an application currently under consideration pending determination. And then further to the east along Tie Lane, you can see the hatched red site. That is the extent of land subject to an application by EDF Energy for a solar farm, again currently pending determination. Slightly further down the slide, you can see black cross-hatched boxes. They depict, the bigger one depicts the National Grid substation at Bullen Lane, and also accessed from Bullen Lane you have the extent of the East Anglia 1 substation complex and the East Anglia 3 converter station complex just next to that. And then just outlined in blue, just for purposes of identifying it on this slide, there's a small rectangular parcel of land which is the UNESCO battery storage site. So that's a development that's almost complete for a standalone battery storage facility, and that is accessed through the same route from Churchill Birstall as this development. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the numbering of the fields, just so that you can see which is which. So field 4 is the area of land which is generally in the mid-Suffolk area and is one on the northern side, which has is proposed to have solar panels across the majority of that area. Field 5 is the larger area in the centre, which again has much of the solar. And then field 6 on the northeast side has some of the solar development, but also has the complex for battery storage and substation, etc. And the cable route leaves the site at that point. You can also see on this slide the route of the footpath right of way, which is shown in dashed yellow, which leaves the bridleway at the south, passes along the eastern boundary of the site, passes between fields 5 and 6, and then along the edge of field 4 to the channel on the northern side of the site. In pink dashed, on a similar alignment to that, is a permissive route footpath. So that is a more obvious desire line route that walkers are using, and is a permissive rather than a statutory route, but it takes more or less the same path. There is also a permissive bridleway route which leaves that footpath and passes between fields 4 and 5 before joining the channel on the western side. Next slide, please. So this plan just shows you that layout in a bit more detail, together with the buffer of land on the southern side from the rights of way, and it's got some of the landscape planting details shown on here. Next slide, please. This is an extract from the layout plan just to show you a bit more detail of the arrangement for field 6, showing the battery storage and substation complex and other pieces of electrical equipment. Next slide, please. This slide has got a bit more detail of the landscape proposals for screening, and you can see buffers around each of the field sections. Next slide, please. So elevation drawing just showing what a string of solar panels looks like, and you've got the height, overall height being 3 metres, and the height from the ground at the lowest point, 0.8 of a metre. It's worth noting that another change in the application since it's originally submitted is that the panels are now to be fixed rather than tracking, so they won't move, and that has implications for reducing the potential for noise impact as well as the potential for glint and glare impacts. Next slide, please. It's just to give you an idea of what the substation building will look like. Next slide, please. And the control room. Next slide, please. And the batteries are to be stored in containers, shipping containers style buildings. So these buildings these containers are about 12 metres long and about 3 metres high, 2.4 metres high. Next slide, please. So moving through to the photographs, this is the access from Churchill. You can just see in the centre of that picture a sign on the side of the access which has the UNESCO logo and all of the directions for the construction traffic for that development. So it's using the same access as that development, so that access exists already from Churchill. The next photographs, I'm going to be taking you around the site as if we're now travelling westward, so we're going towards the channel. So the next slide, please, is an image taken from the Channel Highway looking into a field access, and it's really the main point of visual access to the site from the channel. The rest of the site is either very well screened by mature vegetation or it's set behind existing properties which are further to the south of the channel. But you can see here the topography of the site, so you can see how it rises slightly above the level of the Channel Highway, and you can also just in the foreground see the brickwork for the culvert of Flowton Brook, which passes alongside the same sort of route as the Channel Highway, actually crosses the highway in some points depending on the height of the river. Next slide, please. Now travelling round, still on the channel but at the north side of the site, so you can just see in the foreground the finger post for the right of way. So what you're looking at in the centre of this, behind that tree line, is Field 4. The right of way passes along the outside of that tree line and then south to join the rest of the network. Next slide, please. This is taken more or less at the same point but looking further east. So you can see the finger post in the bottom foreground there and this temporary field access. So the field that you're looking at in the foreground is not part of the application site, it's actually part of the Grey Barn application site, but behind that parcel you would just be able to, in the sort of mid background, you'd be able to see parts of Field 6. Next slide, please. So it's part of the right of way as it travels through the site. Next slide, please. Part of the right of way as it passes between Fields 5 and 6. Next slide, please. And this is an image from the permissive route which travels between Fields 4 and 5. Next slide, please. And this view is taken from the right of way which passes across the southern part of the site where the access route is looking northwards towards the site. Next slide, please. And again along that right of way, but in a slightly different position, just looking that way. You get a sense of some of the characteristics of the landscape here, with lots of mature planting, trees and hedges, the agricultural land, and also you've got the backdrop of some of the wirescape of the pylons and wires going into the substation. Next slide, please. All of these next views are taken from the submitted landscape and visual impact assessment, so they are not of the site, they are of the landscape setting of the site, so they're giving you the wider view. So this image is taken from a right of way within Birstall, just a little way south of where the site is, looking towards the site. Next slide, please. And this is a right of way which is on the southwest side of Birstall, so looking the other way towards the channel and the site on the right of this image. Next slide, please. It's a little further along that right of way, looking towards the site. So you're getting a sense here of the rolling valley landscape, which is a characteristic of the of the landscape character assessment for this area and part of the reason for the designation as an SLA. Next slide, please. So views towards the site from Flowton Road. Again, you're just seeing some of the characteristics of the landscape with interspersed woodland, and it's dominated obviously by agricultural land with some built development. Next slide, please. So views again towards the site from Flowton Road. Next slide, please. And towards the site from a right-of-way between Somersham and Flowton. So quite open and flat in this area, but you can see changes in the topography of the landscape through these slides. Next slide, please. This is just showing the viewpoint locations of those photographs. So the black arrows are showing the pictures of the site itself, and the circles, the pink and yellow circles, are showing you the wider viewpoint location, so showing you the landscape setting. Next slide, please. So I've just included a bit of information here about the benefits of the development in terms of renewable energy generation. So the development would generate the equivalent energy usage of approximately 7,450 homes each year, and a saving of approximately 6,250 tonnes of carbon each year. Next slide, please. Okay, that's the end of the slides for the moment. If we could go back to slide, sorry, let's have slide, can we start with slide 5, please? So I'm going to start with best and most versatile agricultural land. As I said when I was talking to you about this slide, you do have policy CL11, which recognises the importance of agricultural land and seeks to protect most versatile agricultural land. So best and most versatile being grades 1, 2 and 3A. So the Mid-Suffolk portion of this site is best and most versatile, grades 2 and 3. But you'll also see in the assessment in the report that's before you, the consideration that's been given to the fact that the application seeks a temporary permission, that the development of the solar panels are on pile driven rather than foundation, so slightly less intrusive for the soil that the development is on, and that the development is reversible, and that we have a condition in your recommendation for a reinstatement scheme to be agreed, together with ensuring we retain any enhancements in terms of landscape and biodiversity improvements. If I then take you to slide 7, please. So again, we're looking at the cumulative impacts of the development. You can see how I've set out the details of the relevant policies in the local plan and the various weight that we're attributing to those policies depending on how they accord with the MPPF and the objectives therein. Again, we're not querying the principle of the development, but we're dealing with the MPPF objective that renewable energy development should be granted if the impacts are or can be made acceptable, recognising that the Mid-Suffolk local plan and core strategy have specific policies which recognise the difficulty that can be faced by this type of development in being accommodated in the landscape of Mid-Suffolk, particularly large-scale developments. But what's interesting to note here, given the reduction in the size of the scheme and the relative enclosure of the site, given all of the landscaping that exists, together with the mitigation that's proposed, Landscape Officer has concluded that the impact is fairly localised to the site. There's obviously the views from the rights of way which go across the site, but then the impact diminishes fairly quickly as you get beyond the site because of the level of screening it has, arising from the topography and the screening. So you'll see that we've concluded that whilst there is some tension between the objectives of the plan and the proposal, the benefits of the proposal as a renewable energy scheme are considered to outweigh the impacts in terms of impact on best and most versatile land because of the temporary impact and reversible impact, and again, for similar reasons, the landscape and visual impact. I've got through sections on various other topic-specific issues, dealing with things like the historic environment, impact on the setting of listed buildings, archaeology, etc. We've also got a cumulative effects assessment in each section of that, which hopefully makes sense as you've had a look through it. Also dealt with issues of ecology and the calculation of biodiversity net gain, which is way beyond the emerging requirement of 10%. We've got quite a significant net gain to be delivered as a result of the development. And the highway safety and rights of way issues, we've got a section there. We have had concerns from Birstall Parish Council about the traffic, particularly the construction traffic and the routing, but we have had advice from county who are satisfied, subject to conditions, to deal with construction management plan, etc. And then we've also got a section dealing with amenity impacts, including noise, glint and glare, and public safety. Particularly concerns have been raised regarding the safety of the battery installation. There has been a lot of press coverage about incidents relating to battery storage, and we've worked closely with officers at Suffolk Fire and Rescue to ensure we have the information that we need for members to make a decision. And you'll see in the recommendation there is details of emergency response plan to be secured. So I'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So can I just double check then? So so in our papers on page 32, we talk about paragraph 174 of the MPPF, policy FC1, CS5, CL2, and you mentioned, I think, CS11. So what you're saying is within those policies there are concerns, but the overall view is that the benefit outweighs those items.
Yeah, none of the policies out and out say you must not develop on best and most versatile agricultural land. The MPPF 174 requires us to have regard to the natural capital benefits of the countryside. So as part of recognising the value of the countryside and valued landscapes, it's also including in there economic and other benefits that are derived from the countryside, including best and most versatile land. So it's just recognising the value of that rather than saying it's an absolute one way or the other. And your policy CL11 encourages conservation of agricultural land. It does afford particular protection to BMV, but again, it's not an absolute one way or the other saying that we mustn't. It doesn't say we would refuse development on BMV. So I'm weighing the impact on best and most versatile, and you might hear later from the applicant on the landowner on the benefits that might be derived from the development in terms of the ongoing operation of this parcel as agricultural land and adjoining parcel.
Yeah. That is the officer opinion that these policies, and that's really what we are therefore being asked to consider today, whether those policies, the weight of those policies that should be given to the application.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so happy to, and yes, we'll start down the end. Councillor Eburn.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Bron, very much for that. I've got two questions. Could we please just get a view on the fact that Baber District Council heard this application last week, I think, and have voted on it, and just to the context of that in relation to the decision that we have to make today, just to give a bit of further information on or clarity really on that, and the actual specifics that we are voting on as in the whole application as opposed to just the bit that's in Mid-Suffolk kind of view.
Yeah, I asked that exact point in my briefing. We are a separate authority with a separate responsibilities, making separate decisions on land within Mid-Suffolk, but I don't know, Ian, if you want to add anything
Chairman,
else.
you obviously well understand the point. I think I may not need to say anything. And Bron, do you want to go first? And I'll add if necessary with your permission, Chair.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Yes, so Baber District Council did consider this application because, as I said at the beginning, it's a duplicate application made to both authorities for the same development, but made in duplicate because the site happens to cross the administrative boundary. Both authorities are considering the same development, but obviously in context with the respective development plans, which are slightly different for the two authorities. The decision of Baber District Council last week was resolved to grant the development as per the officer's recommendation, which is the same report and recommendation that you have before you, accepting insofar as there is reference to specific development plan policies, and that decision has no bearing on members' ability to make one or other of a decision or a different decision today.
That's great. Thanks for that. And so we are looking at the whole application regardless of whether bits are in Mid-Suffolk or Baber or whatever. Thanks. And secondly, just with regards to the landscape, the special landscape, could you just sort of enlarge a bit on that, particularly paragraphs sort of 7.6, 7.7, in terms of, similar to the best and most versatile land issue sort of argument, as it were, are we, the balance of the special landscape and also the landscape mitigation for that area? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, so you'll see in the report that I'm speaking a little bit about whether the site and its setting is considered to be a valued landscape in the policy sense. So just to give that a bit of context, again, 174 of the NPPF talks about there is no longer a blanket preservation of the countryside for its own sake since the revision of the NPPF. And that's moved towards more recognising the value in landscape, and that is not how a community values it or how users of that landscape value it. It's in a purely policy sense. So testing of that policy has resulted in conclusions that valued landscapes are those that have specific and demonstrable physical characteristics that elevate that area above other areas of normal countryside, for want of a better word. So when looking at this area, it's not just because there's a local designation. That doesn't necessarily automatically make a landscape valued in the NPPF sense, but it's about looking at the various characteristics and how what those physical characteristics do in terms of elevating something to something that's more than just countryside that might be in the rest of the district. So I have concluded that this area could be considered a valued landscape, but that there's not, because of the containment of the site that you can see from the photographs, because of the existing level of mature landscape planting, and because of the proposed mitigation as well. And also you'll see in section 7 that your landscape officer has had consideration for the potential for in combination effects. So that is the experience of users through the countryside of this development here, but also any other developments in combination that would then have a cumulative effect on that experience. And he has advised that there is no potential for in sequence effects, and that because the visual impacts, there will be a visual impact, but that will be fairly limited in its reach because of the topography and the landscape setting, etc. That is to be weighed against the positives of the proposal, and hopefully I've concluded that in that section.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mansell, you next.
Thank you. I've got a few questions, if that's all right, but can I first go back to the split boundary thing, because I think I'm now more confused. I thought Councillor Hicks said we were assessing a planning application on land that is in Mid-Suffolk, and then I had Councillor Eburn saying we're determining the whole application, and the whole application isn't in Mid-Suffolk land. So I'm now more confused than I was before.
Okay, sorry.
If someone can comment on that before I ask my questions.
So the whole proposal is before you, which is comprised on the whole application site, but the development plan that you're working with, the Mid-Suffolk development plan, may only apply to certain elements of the development, whereas the impacts of the proposal, just because they lie on one side or the other of an administrative boundary, won't necessarily not impact the communities of the district. So it's relevant to have regard to the whole development, but only insofar as your policies provide for the consideration.
Well,
Have I got that right, Ian?
I couldn't put it better myself. I mean, just for context, there's an alternative way of these matters being dealt with is for one council, usually to delegate to the other. That has been done, hasn't it? To delegate the decision, but it's not being done in this case, and it's not always not appropriate to do it often, and particularly where there's a matter like renewable energy, where there is practice of applications being considered by committee.
Unfortunately, Chairman, when I usually speak, it adds confusion rather than clarity, so I'm a little wary of this, but and I can see Councillor Matt's already put her head in her hand, so apologies for that. The point here is that you have to apply your development plan policies to the applications part of the site that you have in your area, but nonetheless, you are looking at the totality of the application in the round, but you're only making a decision over the part that lies within Mid-Suffolk on the policies that you have in Mid-Suffolk.
okay, I'm not sure I'm any the wiser, but so if we were to come to a different decision than Baber on this application, what would happen?
So you have, as part of your... Sorry, Chair, is that okay for me to answer that? Is it? I thought it was a question to me, sorry.
No, come in.
Thank you. So as part of your recommendation, you have a request for members to comment on instruction to the Chief Planning Officer to respond to an appeal. So we do have notification of an intention to appeal. That was against the non-determination of the application. Obviously, there will hopefully be a determination today, but that potential for that appeal would still exist if the committee decided to refuse the application, which you're entitled to do for reasons that you see fit. But we would need to also ask for your resolution on defending the appeal as appropriate.
Can I just ask another couple of questions? I've got another couple of questions. We're asked to look at the cumulative effects of all of those other applications which are still in process. Now, how do we assess them in terms of, you know, if this one gets granted, that clearly has an effect on the next one because of the cumulative effect. So is it a case of the first come, first served might get a preferential treatment because the other ones aren't there yet? I'm not quite sure how we can actually assess the cumulative effects fairly. So I'd like a bit of clarity on that. And my other question is about the temporary nature of the planning permission. Is there some sort of decommissioning plan? Is there I've just looked to see if there was a construction management plan, but there's something called a CTMP and a CEMP in your list of conditions, and I can't find them on your list of abbreviations at the front of the report. Are they construction management plans, and is there a decommissioning management plan? Thank you.
Okay, sorry, I'll start with that first then. Apologies for all the acronyms. I was hoping to catch it all in the glossary, but obviously didn't. CTMP, Construction Transport Management Plan, CEMP, Construction Environmental Management Plan. So they are similar things, but they deal with the specifics of transport and working hours, etc., and then specifically to do with biodiversity. So we've separated them out as advised by technical consultees. The decommissioning, so the recommendation I've called it a reinstatement scheme. So the third bullet point in your recommendation, temporary planning permission, removal, reinstatement and retention of biodiversity enhancements. The wording that I have drafted for that condition asks for a strategy for reinstatement. So explanation of how the development will be, the physical elements of the development will be removed and the site will be reinstated, but not reinstated to as it exists now, because we're looking for any biodiversity and landscape enhancement measures to be retained as far as possible. So we're left with a better position than we are in now.
Could I just come back on that? So does that also include a decommissioning transport management plan? Because presumably they'll need a load of trucks to get the stuff off the site, just as they had a load of trucks to get it on the site.
The transport assessment that's part of the application has been considered by county, and that includes the decommissioning phase. The condition that we can certainly include that scheme includes consideration of how the logistics of the decommissioning. Shall I answer the question about cumulative effect?
Yeah, please do.
Thank you. So like I said at the beginning, the applications have been screened as EIA development on the basis of potential for cumulative effects. There was a judgment a few years ago called Vanguard, which talked about what developments should be included in the scope of cumulative effects, depending on what stage they were at in determination. So it is appropriate for the developments that are not yet determined but are in the system and are reasonably foreseeable, which is the wording of the judgment, I believe, to be considered. Both of those other applications are EIA developments as well for the same reason. Both of them include environmental statements. All three environmental statements have been reviewed externally by the same people and found to be sound in each case. And we have enough information in all of the ES submissions to make a judgment on the cumulative effects one to the other. The point, Councillor Mansell, you asked about precedent. I don't think you used the word, but I think you were talking about the precedent of the decision for the others. As in all things planning, it's each case on its merits, and it is each one, first come, first served to a degree, and on the basis of the development plan that's in force at the time. So the granting of this scheme, if members were so minded, would not necessarily have an impact on the others to be granted, but it would firm up the presence of the development in the consideration of cumulative effects, although they're required to have regard to this scheme anyway.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mayor, you were next.
Thanks so much. Thank you for the glossary. It was a tremendous help going through the report. Going back to SLA, can you give us a feel for how much land within Mid Suffolk is designated special landscape?
Oh goodness.
Well, is it a designation that we select more than 90% of the land, or is it a special area that we select for special consideration?
It's mostly the river valleys across Mid Suffolk. We used to have a really nice image that was a piece of paper that folded out of the insert pocket in the local plan document, which showed you the whole district. I would probably hazard a guess at about 10%. Phil might be able to tell me if that's over egging it, but
I'll just bring Philip in on that point.
Yes, Chairman, there is a map of these things, but it's actually less than you might think. I mean, they are special landscape areas because they are not blanket coverage over cost, and as Bron says, they are mostly districts. It's on the website. We could probably find it and get it into this presentation if we worked at it.
I'm happy, thank you. I've got a feel for how special they are. Thank you.
And what you're looking at here, the term in the NPPF, SLAs have been around for many years. They have kind of evolved into the concept of valued landscapes, I suppose. Well, there is the concept these days of valued landscapes, which are not SLAs per se, and you have to look at the particular characteristics. But from our advice to you, they give you a clear indicator that there is a landscape here which is worthy of consideration. And it's for you then to make the decision as to whether you agree they are valued. And if they are valued, whether that has any consequence on your decision.
Lovely, thank you. My next question's a bit technical, really. Units. One of the lobbying documents I received pointed out that the units used to describe the battery storage area are, in their words, rubbish. I do remember my school days a long time ago, get the units wrong, and the homework appeared with a red line through it because it was meaningless. How important is it for the reports you've received to be accurate? Because it seems that they're possibly not.
Okay, so this arises from an objector who is concerned that the battery storage element of the proposal would need hazardous substances consent as well as planning permission. And that's something that we've been working on for a little while and is evolving as we go, because battery storage development is fairly new across the country. The need or otherwise for hazardous substance and consent doesn't affect the ability of the committee to make a decision on the planning permission. It is something that officers are following up with the applicant separately. The information, and we're following up also with the health and safety executive. The information that we have at the moment is that the substances and the potential for substances, and that's where the capacity of the battery installation was a query, because there is some evidence to suggest that the capacity of the battery has a consequential impact on the risk of loss of control incidents, which is where there may be the potential for the release of hazardous substances. You can see that in my report I've spoken about hazardous substances in the other matters section, just in brief, but what I'm saying in essence is that the reasonable foreseeableness, which again is the wording in the regulations of hazardous substances occurring, is a little far removed from this, so I'm concluding that hazardous substances consent is not required, although I'm still holding that sort of under consideration with our legal team and other colleagues as we go along. It is separate from the planning application. It looks like it's possible that the battery storage would be controlled by the health and safety executive anyway under classification, labelling and packaging of substances regulations, so we may not need to duplicate that, which is a principle of planning, that you don't duplicate other regimes. But so that's the principle of the objection, which has featured in the majority of other solar proposals with battery storage that are coming forward at NSIP. So things like the Sonica proposal, the Longfield proposal. So I'm working with those colleagues to bottom out the hazardous substances side of things. In terms of the fire safety and public safety of the proposal, as I said, we've been through the application with Suffolk Fire and Rescue, who are satisfied with the amount of information they have relating to the technology to be installed and the way the development is to be operated, subject to a condition which you've got in your recommendation to secure an emergency response strategy. I'm just checking that I have included that. Because I can't see it now. Sorry, I might need to add that to your recommendation. Is that okay?
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Parson, we were next.
Thanks, Matthew. Just 2 or 3 quick points, please. I think this might be relevant. The conditions here, did the Baber decision add any conditions to the planning consent which might be relevant? And just following on from that, Bronwyn, on page 21, not surprisingly, with the comments to the Design Out Crime Officer, would it be possible to condition the enhanced site security if it were to go ahead, which talks about, well, for example, ANPR, automatic number plate recognition at the site entrance? Would it be possible to condition that if the committee decided to grant approval?
Thank you. Baber District Committee didn't add any conditions. They went with the recommendation as it stands. And yeah, committee can add or amend the recommendation as they see fit.
Thanks. And the other point I wanted over the page, on page 22, where it talks about a 106 agreement, what are we talking about here potentially? Because I've not assessed an application like this before. What sorts of things might be included in a 106 agreement?
So I think, are you talking about the comment from the County Council?
No, from the Development Contributions Officer.
Yeah. So the County Council Developer Contributions Officer has suggested that we look at securing community benefits from the proposal. Unfortunately, there's not currently a lawful mechanism by which to do that bilaterally. So it would have to be something offered unilaterally by the developer. There isn't anything being offered in this case. There was a judgment called the Resilient Energy Judgment a couple of years ago. You may be familiar with the fact that we have a 106 on the wind turbines, and we get a community benefit in the form of a financial payment out of those, which goes to the community for education and other purposes. But that was before this judgment. So the judgment now says that's not actually lawful. We can't use 106 to secure a financial contribution to the community. We do have a series of other benefits that are coming out of this scheme, such as the permissive bridleway and footpath and information board scheme. But we don't have a financial contribution that we're securing, and there is no mechanism for us to do that.
So this would just have to be by agreement then, but there is no, you can't effectively do anything apart from negotiation.
We can't demand it, and it's not a material consideration for the determination of the application if one were to be offered.
And therefore
or the fact that it's not offered is also not material.
It's a goodwill offer, nothing more.
So he can't condition it, which is what it says in the paper.
No, the county officer did ask us to do that, but I had a conversation with them and I asked them to tell us how they thought that we might be able to secure that. I haven't had a reply from them, and I think that's because the conversation went over resilient energy and we realise that there isn't a mechanism currently for that. It is something that's being looked at. There is a current consultation out for NSIP level development and community benefits, and it's very possible if that consultation delivers anything that it will trickle down to Town and Country Planning Act type developments as well. So we're keeping an eye, and I'll keep members updated in general.
Okay, thanks a lot. Cheers.
Thank you. Councillor Matheson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, if I could return to where Councillor Mansell was going earlier, that was helpful. But this is paragraph 7.16 and particularly slide 7. I wonder if we can have another look at that to preferably enlarged to actually see which things are in situ and which are approved and which might happen because we haven't determined them yet. Can we sort that out on that slide?
Oh, you found it, Alicia. Thank you. Yes, slide 7. So the developments that exist, if Alicia just shows the pointer to the black hatched boxes. So the large one at the bottom is the National Grid substation at Bullen Lane, and there's a series of pylons that go in and out of that. The 2 boxes just to the north of that are East Anglia 1 substation, which is completed and operational. East Anglia 3 converter station is under construction currently. And then just to the left of that, outlined in blue, the little rectangle, the Enesco battery storage site is almost complete. Everything else that you can see outlined in red on here is either the application site that you're currently considering or the other 2 solar sites which are currently pending determination.
The other question was in what you've called reinstatement, I think, a moment ago. In the event that we reach the end of the 40 years and the value of the land into the future is not very great for whatever reason, have we any security or bond or whatever to ensure that reinstatement can take place, even if the company which then owned the site has gone bust, in layman's terms?
So I'm recommending a condition to deal with that, and you'll know that the planning permission runs with the land, so the enforcement of that would rest with us, but the responsibility to comply with the condition would lie with the landowner. We have got a bond for decommissioning on other projects in the district, wind turbines. So that is something that's possible, but we're recommending that a condition would be a reasonable way of achieving the same thing.
Okay, any other questions for clarity before we move on? No? Okay, well, thank you. Oh, sorry, John. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just wanting to make sure, perhaps, about the battery fire hazard issue. We sort of, it seems a bit like a sort of a Grenfell Tower process. You rather hope someone else will look after the problems. I just wanted to be assured that you have looked at the papers by Dr. Fordham and Professor Melville, and that you have looked carefully at the Allianz Global Report on battery safety.
Referring to the case officer. Yeah.
Yeah, the latter obviously is the largest insurer in Europe, so probably has some reason to have a level of concern. So have we really
can we not express opinions at this point? It's just for questions of clarity. Ron, have you had a look at those reports?
I have had a look at those. Those parties are people who have made representations on a number of other NSIP solar cases and battery, which I continue to follow with other colleagues across the country. And Suffolk Fire and Rescue colleagues are working with other authority colleagues across the country to work up best practice for dealing with battery storage development. So I'm satisfied that we have all the information and we have all the advice from the relevant technical consultees.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Councillor Massey,
Yeah,
more question?
yes. Sorry, briefly, I've just found my other note about this. I fear officers are going to confirm we haven't got any kind of sequential testing available anywhere, which I mean, it may be that the other sites that are on the slide there under consideration are far more suitable than this site, but I fear we haven't got any sequential testing policy that will let us think about that.
So it's the same story with most planning applications. The question before you is whether this site and this development is acceptable, not whether an alternative is. These developments are EIA, so there is a requirement for some consideration of alternatives, but not necessarily, there's no requirement in the regulations for those alternatives to be pursued, just an assessment of what alternatives exist, including do nothing, that sort of thing. So but the question before members is this application as presented acceptable?
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to move on to public speakers. So first of all, we're going to move on to the parish council. Now, the site encompasses 3 parish councils: Bramford, Flowton and Somersham. So we think it would be appropriate that all 3 get 3 minutes each due to it impacting the 3. So whichever order you want to go. If you want to just go, on my list it says Caroline Walton's going to go first. So are you happy with that? And we have a timer here for 3 minutes. We will ask you to keep to the 3 minutes, please, when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bramford Parish Council accepts the need for and supports renewable energy, however, not at any cost and disregard to the community hosting it. Bramford is already making a huge contribution to the nation's energy supply, with up to 30% of the country's low carbon and renewable energy planned for distribution through Bramford substation. We are overwhelmed by the number of energy projects in Bramford. The cumulative effect of this development and impact of other adjacent solar farms proposed is unacceptable to the village and its surrounding communities. It will have a devastating effect and at a huge cost to the environment. Bramford is being consumed by development and now threatened by solar industrialisation dominating the surrounding landscapes. The proposal conflicts with the local development plan, national and local policies and guidance. Increasing energy supplies from renewables does not override all other considerations. Similar proposals and appeals have been recently refused by Mid-Suffolk for reasons of harm to landscape and heritage assets and inappropriate use of best and most versatile land. Too many exceptions are being made. This must be refused here today. The environmental impact and loss of agricultural land used caused by this application appears disproportionate to the small amount of energy being produced by this project. The loss of 35 hectares of greenfield arable agricultural land in the Gipping Valley Special Landscape Area to power only 7,450 homes. This application undermines government intent to protect such land. National policy states this should be avoided for development and lower quality land used instead, yet none has been considered. A huge amount of residential and industrial buildings granted in recent years have a cumulative impact on Brantford and its infrastructure, and this encroachment is of great concern and being ignored. However, all of these applications granted are without any solar or renewable systems in place, and now we are considering covering our productive fields with them. This is madness. I trust you have all read the councillor briefing note sent to you. Brantford Parish Council supports this document and has crucial information and concerns that must be considered here today, particularly the hazardous substances consent, manufacturer's specifications that seem to be missing, traffic movement, security and fence provision, heritage assets, landscape and flooding. We ask you to refuse this application here today for these reasons. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What I plan to do is have each parish council speak, then take questions to all the parish councils because they may overlap with some areas. So next we have, thank you for that. You still have plenty of time, so you just need to let the egg timer run through. Next up is Nicholas Carter from Flowton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The parishioners of Flowton are totally opposed to this application for several reasons. Principal one being the change of use of this land from being prime agricultural land into becoming a grotesque industrial area and a blot on our beautiful landscape. The applicants claim their proposed use of land is temporary. Timescale we're talking about is 40 years. To most people, Mr. Chairman, 40 years is no way temporary, but it sounds good. Even more serious than the destruction of a pleasant rural environment is a potential loss of food production. We have calculated that should this application be approved, it would entail the loss of more than 10,000 tonnes of food. Are you really of a mind to deny the world 10,000 tonnes of food? Already in this country we have to import more food than we can produce. I'm surprised you as a council are considering this in such depth. It appears to be in total variation of your own policy, document C11. I'm also surprised that the landowner, who incidentally is a friend of mine, should be so keen for his land to be sacrificed. He normally promotes conservation, for example by leaving wide field margins to encourage wildlife, and the parish is grateful to him for that. Of course, there's a lot of money involved here. I had solar panels fitted to the roof of my house 10 years ago and very pleased with them, and with the amount of the electricity they produced. By all means encourage solar panels, but in the correct place. And prime agricultural land is manifestly not the correct place. There are umpteen positions they could, indeed should be fitted. The Amazon building on the site of the old sugar beet factory, the warehouses at Blakenham, Gateway 14 Snow Market. There's 156 acres there, twice the area we're talking about here. The list is limitless. But it should not be a question of food or energy. We need both. And you as a council need to be strong enough to restrict the erection of solar panels to rooftops, so agricultural land is still available for food production. Councillors, the choice is yours. Are you going to vote for Mid-Suffolk to retain its productive farmland, or are you going to vote for it to be blighted by potentially dangerous eyesores? Should you choose the latter, we and future generations will never forgive you. I hope you all sleep well tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. James Rook from Somersham, you're next. We're not using the egg timer because it takes too long to run through, because you're shorter than the 3 minutes, so we're using a timer here, rest assured.
Good. Good morning, everybody. I'm James Rook, a farmer, a farmer's son, and I'm here to share my parish's views as Vice Chairman of the Somersham Parish Council. Our community are huge supporters of a greener future and believe solar has an important part to play. However, solar is not perfect and it leaves its own carbon footprint, with manufacturing and decommissioning in particular. Our community is strongly against this proposal and does not believe that East Anglia, as a net exporter of energy, should be putting solar panels on such valuable resources as some of the best farmland in the UK and, in fact, the world. The greenest thing we can do is grow our own food on our doorsteps. And let's use more suitable places, such as brownfield sites and warehouses and homes for solar panels. Whilst our community understands a farmer's motivation to receive £1,000 an acre guaranteed for 40 years, rather than working very hard in the hope of £150 an acre, we feel this may be a wise choice for the individual, but not for the greater community. Our community is very keen on protecting our environment and the beautiful Suffolk countryside for their families, their children, grandchildren, and the next generations. The community unanimously rejects these proposals. We feel this is not a green vote. That would be beyond naive. Sorry, I lost my place. In East Anglia, we create more energy than we use. We export energy to other areas of brownfield sites, and we lose energy en route. We should be generating more energy at point of use. Please, on behalf of our community, don't be fooled into sacrificing some of the best agricultural land in the country for technology that will be antiquated incredibly quickly. This is a green Trojan horse, and if you allow this today, you will be opening the door unnecessarily for far greater loss of much valued countryside. In the future, we have the likes of Tesla tiles coming, and much, much more. We don't need to ruin our countryside. Our community wants a truly green future, and we have a lot of challenges ahead, but getting rid of productive farmland would simply be reckless. We don't believe we have to choose between food and energy. There are far more sensible energy solutions in more sensible locations. However, if we did have to choose, we would prefer that our great-grandchildren eat by candlelight rather than starve with the lights on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, happy to take questions. If there are any questions for the parish councils at all? Yep, Councillor Matheson.
Yes, I obviously sympathise with lots of things that the parishes have said.
Please, Councillor Matheson, can we not express opinions, please? We're not in debate.
My one question about that is, and this is to particularly any of the speakers who have coming from the farming background and the food argument, have you made any assessment of the food that can be produced with and underneath the solar panels? We understand sheep and we understand chickens are feasible, let's say, co-production methods with solar panels. Would you like to ask the applicant?
Do you want to ask the applicant that question after they've spoken?
Yeah, I felt there was knowledge in the room on farming, which can be directed to the last speaker.
Yeah, I think that for the last speaker who has the farming experience, if you want to comment.
First of all, I'm unaware of this working anywhere else effectively with livestock. You simply have these. You can't put that infrastructure in and look after livestock. I can't see. You might be able to have one sheep and take it for a walk. This is not going to be productive.
Thank you very much. No other questions? Okay, so thank you for that. We'll now move on to an objector, Samantha Main, and again, you have 3 minutes when you're ready.
Thank you. What can I say after 2.5 years of this? I have walked the footpaths that surround this site and look across it for many years. I enjoy walking across the fields and I enjoy watching the fields change and the crops grow as the seasons move on. I know many people are quickly forgetting how beneficial just being in the countryside can be to well-being. We all learnt that during the pandemic. But the residents here haven't forgotten it. This is a special landscape and it is a valued area, as the officer even recognises, and it's not just because it says so in the local plan. We all know it. I want, though, in my few remaining minutes to highlight some misjudgments that were made in the Baber meeting.
given these flaws, amongst others, judicial review is a very real possibility. You might hear from the landowner about the environmental work that he does, the wide field margins he has, and as a parish we are very grateful for that. We like looking at those. It's a shame then that the plans for this proposal would destroy some of those margins by covering them in internal roadways, solar panels, covering them in fences and digging them up for cables. A lot of taxpayer grant money went into some of those environmental managers. Babor councillors asked about the temporary nature of the proposal. A condition is proposed to limit it to 40 years, but I think you're smart enough to know what can happen to a condition that a developer doesn't like. We can only hope the council has a good enforcement team. And it's also entirely possible that in 39 years' time, the owner of the site could submit an application to extend the life of the solar farm for another 40 or however many permanent years he likes. Another misjudgment was around the relevance of hazardous substances to the application. We've had that quite a bit today. Hazardous substances are relevant to public safety, and public safety is a material consideration. Even the committee report admits that in the event of a battery fire, there would be air and water pollution. We already have 3 battery storage units in the area. The report fails to highlight that groundwater in this site is within a protection zone for an aquifer that supplies Ipswich and the surrounding areas with its drinking water. It'd be a shame to see some of those hazardous substances get into that. And lastly, the issue around precedent. It isn't a coincidence that court cases refer to previous court cases. Developments must indeed be decided on their own merits, but previous decisions, including appeals, are material considerations in that decision. That means if you approve this contrary to the development plan, and let's be clear, this is contrary to the development plan, then other developers can use that as evidence against you. A few months ago, Mid-Suffolk refused another solar farm application in Rickinghall, and it is being appealed. If you approve this application today as an exception to the development plan, then that can be used against you in that appeal. And not just for that application, for all applications in the future too. Precedent
Your
is
time is up, so it will have to be the last sentence, please.
Precedent is very real, so saying no to this application isn't saying no to solar, it's saying yes to the local development plan.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions at all? No? Okay, thank you very much for that. We'll now move on to a supporter, John Cousins. Again, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is John Cousins. I'm the owner of Brook Farm with my son Robin and my daughter Amelia. I have always farmed in the most environmentally friendly way that I can manage. Since I took over the management of the farm in 1985, I have undertaken considerable activity, and it has been mentioned, and I appreciate that, to help wildlife by removing over 75 acres of arable land from crop production to create areas of woodland, new hedges, wildflower meadows, and annually planted areas to provide nectar for invertebrates and food for birds. This equates to 22% of my farm. The solar area will equate to a further 24%, which means half my farm will have been taken out of arable production. It's been very difficult to consider this whole project. It's not an easy one, and I don't believe that some people believe that I have environmental motives, but I do. I see the areas involved as potential habitat. There's going to be no destruction of field margins. There's going to be no change. There's going to be enhancement of field margins and larger areas for the environment. My view is that the farmed area, an arable crop, is hostile to wildlife. 40 years, yes, a very short period of time, but in the last 40 years, we've seen over 40% of our biodiversity to 50% of our biodiversity disappear. In the last 20 years, the number of insects have halved. The talk about food security, good stuff, but there is only 57 acres of solar panels in this country at the moment. That's 1 acre per 1,000 acres. Meanwhile, there are 250,000 acres of crops, arable crops grown for biofuels. Fuels to put in cars, which we won't be needing in 30 years because maybe they'll all be electric. We export 2 million tonnes of wheat. There's a perception that we don't export anything. We export 2 million tonnes of wheat, and at the moment there are 1 million tonnes of wheat in store waiting to be exported on the world market, and it's looking quite difficult to export it. So we have got food security, and my small area isn't going to jeopardise that. It will be grazed with sheep. Look at the evidence in Australia, and the sheep production has actually improved in Australia under solar panels, much improved performance by sheep, and it will be grazed. It'll also be planted with pollen and nectar species and wildflower species, which I believe will be hugely beneficial. So
your time is up to the last sentence, please.
That will probably do, because I've gone completely off my script, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Yes, Councillor Humphreys.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Two questions, really. One, is it more viable for you as a farmer to diversify and have a solar farm and take the rent from that than it is from agriculture? And the second question is, how many sheep have you got?
At the moment, we have about 40 ewes with followers on the farm. It's a fairly low-intensity grazing unit. I do that in partnership with an ex-pigman who lives on the farm still, and I would look into him to do grazing on this area, or I will introduce a grazier. So you know, that is something I really want to do. In terms of profitability, my farm is a small farm. It's 325 acres. That is small, it's inefficient in terms of scale. Obviously, the financial rewards of this are a consideration, but equally, my passion, and I have worked all my life in wildlife, both professionally and voluntarily, my passion is the environment, and I'd like to think that I can achieve things on this farm that will show just what can be delivered through a sympathetic scheme delivered in a sympathetic way.
Thanks very much. Okay, we move on. Thank you very much. Next up we have the applicant, Simon Chamberlain, and again 3 minutes, please.
Good morning. I'm Simon Chamberlain from Enzo Energy. We are the applicant here. We have significantly reduced this scheme in scale and size as a result of feedback from communities and both statutory consultees. This has resulted in a development which no statutory consultees have objected, and your officer has been able to recommend for approval. No land will be lost to the development. It's temporary, and after delivering the benefits, it's entirely reversible. So accordingly, we respectfully ask you to approve this proposal.
Thank you very much. Any questions at all? Yes, Councillor Mansell.
I just wanted to ask about the fact that you've changed this application from having rotating panels that follow the sun to static ones, and I'd just like you to, if you could explain how that affects the efficiency of solar panels.
It doesn't so much affect the efficiency of the solar panels, because it still remains the same panel whether it's fixed or whether it's tracking. What it does, though, is it slightly reduces the yield of the solar farm. So if you can imagine, yes, they are. The yield is not as great from fixed panels as it is from tracker panels. However, owing to reducing the land take and moving it keeping it just on those southern fields, the actual sort of curvature, there's slightly rolling fields there. They don't lend themselves as well to the layout of tracking panels.
Okay, any other questions? Nope. Okay, so thank you very much. We now move over to the ward member, Councillor John Field. Over to you.
Thank you. I'm close enough to that. I've really heard such a set of competent responses from parishes and objectors. It's good to hear that. Perhaps difficult to follow some really logical arguments. I also have to say one respects John Cousins' integrity and his views, although one believes it's mistaken that you need solar panels to achieve the environmental benefits he can achieve. I think the problems with climate change make it imperative that we change many aspects of life as we currently lead it. One of the most important is migrate from fossil fuel for power generation to energy sources that release zero carbon. And I think virtually all residents accept that point. We all expect change. However, the same residents believe, as you've heard, that it's foolish to sacrifice agricultural land from a large area of high-grade farmland, the best and most versatile, grade 2 and 3A. The farm produce can of course be substituted by imports shipped in at considerable damage to the environment. However, that does not bring certainty of supply. As you've heard, they believe that there is an alternative approach, which is basically putting these solar panels on other buildings, on those that are available in the various warehouse areas that we now have, and certainly on domestic housing. There's about 29 million house roofs in this country that could supply power to us, and I think estimates of up to 18 gigawatts of power from the roofs of warehouses. So there are alternative solutions to this problem. I think that's what the NPPF actually asked us to look at when we consider development in the countryside. And if I can just run through a set of bullets. Sorry, it's trapped around the back, so it's difficult to get at. I was going to come through a set of really bullet points that, to my mind, summarise what's been said. The first is that the amenity of the surrounding villages and the attractiveness of the vital walking routes will be severely compromised, with a negative effect on physical and mental health and consequent costs to health and social care. I think that while habitats of some species of wildlife will be enhanced, boundary fencing will improve routes and compromise survival of other species. The development will have a significant adverse effect on local food production and will be replaced by imports using carbon-intensive transport. This development, particularly taken cumulatively with the others proposed, would dominate the village of Flowton and have a major impact on Birstall, Bramford, Somersham and Little Blakenham. These villages have already accommodated major wind farm related infrastructure, obviously the Great National Grid substation and various other power related equipment. Any argument that their amenity has already been compromised, so it's appropriate for it to be destroyed, I believe is false. It's reasonable to severely, if it's reasonable to severely restrict the area consumed by onshore wind power generation, then surely it's reasonable to restrict solar power installations to be ancillary to other necessary infrastructure, i.e. on various roofs and maybe even above car parks. To move on a little, the technology employed by the large batteries provided to provide very short-term compensation for the intermittent nature of solar PV generation prevents a significant risk of fire with toxic chemical release. And we've heard that's been properly assessed. I wonder if that's after the 2 fires at Sackers in the last month, which I believe are caused by lithium batteries. The intermittency and daily cyclic nature of photovoltaic power generation are poorly matched to the need and therefore make it at best a minor contribution to the urgent need to replace current generation with low carbon alternatives. I believe last year solar power provided less than 4% of the UK's power needs, when if you look at wind power it supplied about 39%. So my view is really to say please reject this application, encourage installation on domestic and commercial property, and that is where I rest my case.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for the ward member? No? Okay. I've been asked, I think, by someone if we just take a quick break. So what I propose is take a 10-minute break before we get into the debate. Can I just remind members, please, not to discuss the application that is before us at the moment, please, during the break, and we'll start again at 11:05 by the clock on my left, which is different to the one on my right. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So before we go into debate, Mr. Isbell just wants to come back on a couple of points.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, Councillor Mayer asked about special landscape areas. By the power of the internet, we have an answer to the question which I think we should be able to show you. Now, accepting that that's a very large-scale plan, if you look at the cursor at the bottom of that slide, and if you can just move that area, you can see. So the special landscape areas on that plan are green, vertically hatched. So that gives you the extent of SLAs across the district, and in particular, because we're not interested in the others, this is valued landscape is not defined by the fact you've got a designation of it. It is other than that. But that's the area of SLAs across the district generally, and that's the SLA in particular here. So just wanted to put that up because I did happen to find it and I thought it was useful to Councillor Mayer's understanding. So thank you for that, Alicia. The other point I wanted to pick up on was more generally, in your table papers you have a comment from a Mr. Ballard making reference to some legal aspects. We have had Council's advice on the report as it stands, so I think from our point of view we are comfortable with this. I think I would wish to correct a couple of points that Mr. Ballard has made to you, that he has said on the fifth page of the table papers that the first duty in deciding an application is to establish whether or not the proposal accords with the plan, read as a whole, including not only the stated policies but all their objectives and the supporting text. And you will know that there is a difference between development plan and material considerations, and the development plan comprises the policies and the maps, and the supporting text and the objectives are material considerations, so they are not quite the same thing. Yes, you need to have regard to the relevant policies in the plan, and you need to be seeking to achieve the purpose of the plan, but you do need to be considering the fact that they are not one simple thing, and they are not as a whole, strictly speaking, entirely the development plan. So it's also a point of correction I wanted to raise, that as far as renewable energy is concerned, you have a policy. I think paragraph 5.7 of the report refers to CS3, which is your core strategy policy. And in that, we say that policy is not up to date in terms of the NPPF. So I think we would have to take issue with the statement from the correspondent that there is no evidence the plan is out of date. The plan as a whole, you have to take each individual plan policy and consider on the application whether the relevant parts of that are up to date if we are looking at the question of up-to-dateness under the NPPF, and that is what is relevant to your decision. And from our point of view, CS3 provides a policy context that was set at its time and is no longer up to date. And similarly, the reference that Mr. Ballard has made in relation to core strategy objectives, again, I would take back to the point that they are material considerations, but they are not the planning policies that are subject of section 38.6, which we all know and love in this committee. So there is some caution, I would say, to the way that you are addressed on legal matters in that. I'll leave it to any discussion and anything Mr. Dupre wishes to add further to that, but from our perspective, we believe we've presented you with a reasonable and fair balance of these things, and there is a choice to be made, and that is what planning committees do across the country. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. So members, we've had all the information put before us. We've heard from various speakers. We've had a presentation from the case officer, and obviously we've got the papers in front of us. It's now time for us to discuss, debate, and to come to a conclusion. If you're ready to speak, please just put your hand up. Yeah, Councillor Passmore and Councillor Eburn.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Well, this is a very complicated and a difficult decision, I find, to come to a conclusion, because there are many balancing factors here. And with my knowledge of farming, I can understand why there is support for diversification, energy production, etc. But I think the issue of food security has been brought into very sharp focus since that terrible invasion of Ukraine. Maybe this is something that's been progressing for some time. I'm also concerned that the work that the District Council is doing regarding tourism, the visitor economy and so on, and I do sit on that group doing that, and the impact on landscapes could be quite detrimental. And I know we're only looking at a small part of the overall scheme, which adds to the complexity from my personal point of view. But I do have to say that looking after our landscape and agricultural production, the overall scheme, including in both districts, I think could probably produce, in a good year, maybe 300 tonnes of wheat. I'm not saying it's in wheat production all the time, forever and a day. Obviously, depending on weather conditions, it does make a difference. But I think overall, food security is an important issue. Yes, we have a thriving agricultural export industry in this country and imports, but then again, if you do look at the carbon impact of having to import things like that, I do think that is a significant issue. I haven't completely made up my mind on this, but I do think preservation of the landscape, I'm not entirely convinced about the need to put up solar farms, and I know this is a relatively small one, I absolutely accept that. So at the moment I am moving towards a refusal of this application, but we'll wait and hear what other people have got to say as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Eburn.
Thank you very much, Chair. As my colleague has said, it's a very complex application, and I think I welcome all the people that have contributed their views, whether experts or local experts, as it were. So that's very welcome. And it's also good to see that there has been negotiation or liaison between the developer and the community to some extent. I think overall, I think we'd all like to see solar panels on warehouses and on areas of brownfield land, and in Mid-Suffolk we own a massive business park that personally I'd like to see covered with solar panels, but that's not what we're discussing here. This isn't a warehouse, this is a area in the areas of land. I think one of the issues that we have here at Mid-Suffolk is that we don't have a policy for community value of land, and that's something that personally I'd really like to see. We've got a small part of a special landscape area, but we don't have anything that we as in the planning committee can actually rely on in terms of what is the community value of a particular area, and I think that would be very helpful if we had. And similarly, we don't have any policies on food production, and again, that would be very useful to have. And I think the overall, we kind of, in the planning committee, we aren't experts, we are councillors, so we rely on expert views and we listen carefully to the views of the local people and to the applicant and so on and so forth. And with this application, it is complex. It is in a lovely area of Suffolk, and at the moment, as I think you can tell from me, I'm sitting on the fence as to where I go from here, but I just wanted to put across those points, Chair, and I'll look forward to hearing from my fellow councillors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mayor, you would...
Thank you. Yeah, difficult. For me, this boils down to really three issues: visual and landscape impact, BMV, and the storage. We've heard that the visual impact will be limited due to containment, mitigation, and yet it sits within an SLA. Hence, to my mind, should be given greater protection. It's only going to be temporary. I struggle with the word temporary. I worked for 40 years and it didn't feel very temporary when I was going to work. So there are going to be, I think, quite significant ecological benefits. A large field of wheat or a monoculture is a biodiversity wasteland. So having what intents and purposes will be increased grassland will be a significant improvement. So whilst I struggle with visual impacts, I could be persuaded that the impact is limited. Battery storage. I I think sometimes we're asked to make decisions that we're not technically really equipped to make. There are obviously issues with battery storage, but we here do not have the knowledge or the understanding, but we're required to make a decision. It is worrying that the applicant didn't get the units right. It might only be a small thing, but it just raised the question in my mind, do they fully grasp and understand the issues around battery storage? But at the end of the day, our technical advice is that it's okay. So again, I could be persuaded there on the battery storage. Best, most valuable land. That's probably, for me, the crux of the matter. There are ecological benefits. We have, as a council, declared a climate change emergency. So, should we be reusing the best agricultural land to generate electricity to help deal with that climate change emergency? Temporary, to my mind, it's not temporary in terms of time, but I could be persuaded it's temporary in terms of it's only using piles to hold the panels, so it can be reversed relatively easily. But on balance, I think I'm beginning to feel that we're not making best use of the land if we approve this, so I'm tending towards refusal. But again, like the rest of my colleagues, I'd like to hear what they have to say. Thank you.
Councillor Humphreys, you are next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pretty much a similar vein in some respects. I am a fan of innovation. I'm a fan of renewable energy without a shadow of a doubt. Someone mentioned earlier that perhaps in the future all cars will be driven by electricity and therefore there's a reason for this. Well, actually, there's just as much work going on hydrogen engines at the moment, and Toyota have just released their first. So maybe it'd be hydrogen in the future. The fact is, no one really knows, but it's a point well made. I'm also a fan, really, of self-reliance. Self-reliance as a nation on energy provision for our people, for now and in the future, and also food reliance and food security. There are two different things, actually, when it comes to security and your ability to be independent as a food supplier, but they blend. There's lots of government stuff on that. However, it is really important. I'm also keen on protecting our landscape, and we've just mentioned this is an SLA, so that's definitely an important factor for me. This is our green and pleasant land, we should protect it. But I understand the push for solar because this is sunny Suffolk, so there's an argument for both cases. The war in Ukraine really has proven a lot of things to us about reliance, about our own capabilities, about our domestic capabilities on energy and on food, and both are important. And it's not just about supply, it's about prices as well. If we can produce more, the prices should be less. I know that's not an exact science. We talk about driving towards net zero, and I get that, and I commend the applicant actually for all the work he's done previously in trying to protect the environment. Well done, and we should have more farmers with that same attitude. But that doesn't mean we should just go, do you know what, because of what you've done, you can do this. I'm not so sure, but thank you for what you have done. When we drive towards net zero, we're talking of that as a nation, not just as a district. But let's talk about Suffolk itself, and we look at our net zero drive. We've got nuclear power stations. We've got another one about to be built. That nuclear power station, Sizewell C, will provide power for 6 million households. Think about that, it's incredible. And it will reduce the carbon offset by 9 million tonnes a year. That's pretty good, isn't it, for Suffolk? That's a good drive towards net zero. Not just one small solar farm, but real big stuff. And then we look at our coastline, and off our coastline we've got some of the biggest wind farms in the world. I think we're doing our bit. And I think we're doing our bit really well. When it comes to solar, I also see the advantage of that, but I don't think it should be in our fields. I'm a fan that it should be on all the warehouses that we're building on Gateway 14, all the ones that we're putting on the enterprise gateways, all the hangars that are here from disused Second World War airfields, you name it. There are plenty of places where you can put solar panels that actually do not affect the countryside because there's already something industrial in place, and I think that's quite important. I'd like to look at the argument side of it. And I'd like to take to page 31, because I had a few issues with this. I'm sorry if I'm rambling between notes, but I wrote so much because thank you for your contributions. It really set my mind a race, because you all had some really important points. If we go to page 31, this is the argument really, 6.8. Overall, therefore, the impact on B&V is not considered to be such as to warrant refusal of this application. This is because any inherent tension with policy CL11 is mitigated by the factors referred to above. And I'll take you to those factors. So, and I'll summarise a couple of them rather than read the whole thing out. It talks about there are a number of factors specific to this application to consider in the assessment of impact on B&V land. First, as part of the ES, the applicant has, among other things, described the steps that were taken to assess alternative options. And I think that's really important. He did do some work on that, and he argued very well as to why they couldn't take place, and that's fine. If we now move down to the other bit, steps have been made to minimise the impact of the development on B&V, including the proposed panels to be installed on ground-driven piling, similar to fence posts, rather than with concrete foundations. The provision of low-intervention grassland between the panels, which is suitable for sheep grazing and biodiversity. We spoke about wildflower planting. We talked about the biodiversity. It's all very important. But if we're going to plant wildflowers on there and going to put sheep on there, how long do you think the wildflowers are going to last? It's a counter-argument, actually. And as we've discussed before, and there's loads of things on the internet, it's great the internet, where you can actually argue against that being a positive. But that's just somebody's opinion, I guess. It's also important to note the application seeks permission for a limited period of 40 years. I've looked around this room, there are very few people here who will be alive in 40 years' time. That's how long it is, okay? It's not temporary. It's temporary in the fact that it's a defined length of time, temporary, as in the true description of the word, but it's not really temporary, and that's a really good point. Like you, I spent a lot of time in work, and it certainly wasn't temporary. So this is not a temporary solution. So let's just get away from all that gloss and that smoke and mirrors, shall we, and see what it is. It's 40 years of loss of B&V. And if we look at that B&V value, in case people haven't, I have, it talks about, let me have a look, just get the, I'm sorry if I'm rambling on, but I think it's important. If we look at, find a thing, the Guide to Assessing Development Proposals on Agricultural Land, this has been pushed out by the government and Natural England, and it's to help councils decide on things like this. And it talks about the MPPF, so it's not just some woolly sort of soft lefty sort of idea. This is based on fact and by documentation. But if we scroll all the way down, it's really important. It talks about how to assess agricultural land. It talks about the grades. And again, not everyone will know this, but grade 2, it's quite a proportion of this land, isn't it, from what I've seen from all the pictures that have been put up today in the discussion. And it talks about this, land with minor limitations that affect crop yield, which means it's very good. And actually, the other definition of grade 2 is very good. Okay, so it's not poor agricultural land. Once it's lost for 40 years. Right, it's incredible. So it talks about that. Grade 3, good to moderate quality agricultural land. And 3A, good quality agricultural land, capable of consistently producing moderate to high yields of narrow range of arable crops, especially cereals. Well, guess what the Ukraine war taught us? We have a reliance on cereal crops. Hello. So therefore, sugar beet and everything else, cereals, grass, all the stuff we need, rapeseed. And 3B, moderate quality agricultural land. So none of this, and I have heard the word poor, none of this land is poor land, unless you'd like to argue otherwise. Cool. So I have a real issue with it. The 40 years, the effect on the visual scene, the fact that we're losing valuable agricultural land, to me, that's nonsense. We should not be pushing this through. And I am sided on this. I am not going to vote in favour of this. So that's me. Thank you.
Very much. Councillor Matheson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just first to say to the objectors, goodness me, this committee and other committees and in other places, we have tried to put more solar onto roofs of houses and roofs of warehouses, but we don't have the policy context from government that would allow us to insist on that. So that's a problem which we wrestle with continuously. I'm particularly struck by the fact that this is largely in special landscape area. I'm a big defender of those as a big area in the ward that I represent, which I bring forth fairly regularly at planning applications. it is a pity that this is so much of this, 3/4 of this, I think we decided was the best and most versatile agricultural land. That is a problem. However, we have declared a climate emergency, and although it is true that the electricity needs to be produced nearer to where it is consumed, i.e. millions of roofs in London, for instance, it is also the case that the forecast of the future for electricity demand is 2 or 3 times what we're using at the moment, which does require a very great deal more production, even in East Anglia. So those are the things that are pushing me in the one way, but then I look at, or both ways, and then I look at the problem that we need some solar farms, but are the better sites, and we haven't really got the tools and the evidence to help us to judge that, which is pretty frustrating. This is certainly not the worst site, but it may not be the best site. So I find it very difficult, and I'll hear what others still are going to say.
Just a point of clarity from, yeah, you want to come in?
Just a point of clarity, if I may. Councillor Matheson mentioned this is for local. It's going to be provided for the local communities or the local areas. Can I just, as a point of clarity, confirm that any electricity generation, whether it be from Sizewell or from a solar panel, actually goes into the national grid? Thank you. So it's not strictly for local, yeah?
Well, unless it's in batteries.
So can I have a confirmation of what we've got? Thank you.
I'm not sure that's relevant to the application before us, would be my view. Councillor Mayor?
Yeah, just a point of fact, really. Several people have mentioned warehouse roofs, Gateway 14. There are issues with putting solar panels on all the warehouses in Gateway 14 because the national grid cannot accept the electricity. So it is not just the council failing to get them on roofs. There are infrastructure problems, and that actually supports this scheme because the substations are close enough to accept the electricity.
Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Mayor, because I was going to mention the fact that that does seem to be the issue here, is that these fields that we're talking about now just happen to be adjacent to a substation. And I think that is the prime reason for someone applying to put a solar farm here. And yes, I understand that that is an issue with putting solar panels on roofs of buildings elsewhere in the district. And maybe we, as a nation, and not just a council, need to address that issue because it clearly is a problem that these fields that happen to be in a beautiful part of the Suffolk countryside, a special landscape area, just happen to be, unfortunately, adjacent to a substation, and therefore it's really convenient and really easy to generate electricity there. So I too am torn. I really don't know which way to go on this application. We so rarely hear anything about Grade 2 arable land here in mid-Suffolk. I would be interested to know, I'm not sure if it was in the papers, how much Grade 2 land we actually have in mid-Suffolk. I don't think we've got a lot. Other applications that we've had before us at committee, we have talked about Grade 3A and 3B, but we see very rarely do we get anything that is above Grade 3. So the very fact that part of this site and a reasonable proportion of this site is on Grade 2 listed, Grade 2 arable farming land is my biggest issue with it, really. The fact that it is we don't have any Grade 1 land, so Grade 2 is our best land, and here we are proposing that we put solar panels on it. And yes, I agree with much of what was said by others about the fact that we need more and more electricity. unfortunately, society seems more bent on trying to get as much electricity as possible rather than reducing how much we actually use. But that is just society for us, and I don't think we can do an awful lot about that. So yeah, we need electricity, and it seems to be that we are being hostage to the fact that this is next to a substation. I'm also very concerned about the cumulative impact. When you see that map that we were shown on the presentation of the other two large applications, that sort of tract of beautiful landscape will be, if all of those applications are approved, will just become a sea of solar panels in a beautiful area adjacent to the substation. Okay, we're only here determining the bit we've got before us, but the very fact that it has a reasonable proportion of grade 2 land is making me lean slightly towards refusal. But I'll listen to see if anyone else has anything more to contribute to convince me otherwise. But I think this is a really tricky decision for us to make. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'll give my view, then we'll go round again, if that's okay. So, yeah, I agree with everyone. This isn't easy. We absolutely want to encourage farmers to diversify. We've always said that. It's important that businesses evolve and move forward. But we've heard very eloquently spoken from the parish councils and from the ward member around the concerns and the impact this is going to have. Where I sit, CL11 is a significant consideration. The best, most valuable land, I think, is something that, to me, hasn't been pushed out of my concern pile by the officer's presentation today. I think we've had an excellent presentation, but that still concerns me significantly. If I look at page 32, we've got paragraph 174 of the MPPF, mentioned in paragraph 7.3. We've got policy FC1, we've got policy CS5 and policy CL2. And when I look at all those and the impacts of those on this application, they actually still ring alarm bells with me. I, again, look at those and think, actually, quite a lot of those are relevant and cause me a concern. And again, I can't just put those to bed and think, those are actually overridden by the benefits that this scheme will bring. So I won't be supporting it because I'm not comfortable with what I see before me, but also it's been made clear by the case officer that an appeal is likely anyway. And actually, I feel for Mid-Suffolk this isn't right, but I think it'll be down probably for the inspector to determine if the whole thing is right for Suffolk. And I feel to me, I'm comfortable with that route. So that's the direction I'll be taking. Councillor Passmore, you were next. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Matthew. Right, I've made my mind up, so I'm going to formally propose rejection for the following reasons. And by the way, we do need to listen to local people. There's not an awful lot of point in people putting submissions in, and there is such a weight of public opinion against this proposal. And I do understand the plus points as well. But I think on balance, I am formally going to propose rejection on the basis of I do think it compromises and takes out of very good agricultural land out of production, and I think that to me is important. I am concerned about the impact in a special landscape area. I think that's very, very important indeed, because we don't have big areas, and I mentioned earlier when I spoke regarding tourism, biodiversity and these sorts of things, I do think that is particularly important. So for those two reasons, that's why I'm going to move rejection if anyone wants to support it. And I do agree, Chairman, if there is an appeal pending, then that does not mean the applicant will not be successful overall. So there we are, you have it, that's my view, and I'm therefore proposing rejection for those two reasons primarily.
And I know Councillor Humphries wants to, I think, come in a second. Do you want to add anything to the points raised?
No, I think they're clear, and CL11 is the killer. And again, if I take you back to page 31, it's right on the top of it, which moved my direction in that way. And again, the public opinion on this. We are here to think about the benefits for Suffolk, benefits for the nation. We need to listen to our residents as well, and the people on the ground who we represent. So for that reason, I will second
think of a couple of other things. On my playlist is cumulative impact, which I think, we've talked about it, we've heard about it. That would be something that I'd chuck in there. And I would go back to paragraph 7.3, 7.4, 7.5 and 7.6, because to me, they are part of the material consideration. They are for me. I don't know if they are for you. Yeah. Councillor Matheson.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just to briefly understand my point about producing electricity near at hand to where it's consumed. Transmission losses are very significant. We learnt that some years ago when we had big proposals around that, so that was useful. It's interesting that what Councillor Hicks has just been pointing to is very much the other part of the things that I wanted to pick up, which was about the conclusion, the paragraph 15, the balance. And what worries me about that is that the balance is being struck almost entirely without reference to our policies. Now, we're told that the development plan is all these various different things insofar as they're consistent with the NPPF and so on and so on. But I think that they are absent from that balance, and I think they should not be absent. And so that then comes back to what others have said. And I think it was particularly unkind in that balance to suggest in 15.3 there are not otherwise considered to be any adverse impacts on heritage, ecology, etc. Well, amenity, crucially, now I think that is very wrong, really. One has to say wrong in terms of the rest of what we've got in the report and what we've seen on the screen and what we've heard from the parishes and their objections. That there are adverse impacts, and our job usually, and in this case, is to balance those adverse impacts with the benefits. So that's the difficult balance to strike. I hear what others have said about that, and I think on the whole I will agree with refusal in the hopes that we'll see better applications come forward which are not on the best land and that are in other ways less impactful. But to suggest this does not have impacts on all those categories is not right. So I'm sorry about that, but I will have to vote against it with a heavy heart.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wish to speak? Okay, so Philip, we'll need you just to put together what we've said so that we have something written that can then be put on the voting.
Chairman, can I suggest it might be appropriate for you to allow me 5 minutes with the proposer and seconder, and then we can put heads together and give you something that can be voted upon, please.
So if the proposer and seconder just confer Okay, welcome back, everyone. So we've had a proposal for refusal from Councillor Passmore, and a proposal for refusal has been seconded by Councillor Humphreys. So before we get, and no one else wished to speak, so we are going to go to the vote on that, but we're just going to run through the reasons for refusal that we'll be voting on. Hand over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. So the first reason relates to best and most versatile agricultural land, and the reason is as follows. The presence of the development on best and most versatile agricultural land would unacceptably reduce the availability of this land for the optimum purposes of agriculture. The benefits of the development are not considered to outweigh this impact, and the development plan expects that particular protection will be given to such best and most versatile agricultural land. On this basis, the proposal will be contrary to policy CL11 of the adopted Mid-Suffolk Local Plan, and contrary to the NPPF paragraphs 158B and 174B. The second reason, Chairman, that councillors have coalesced around is the industrial and utilitarian appearance of the development would result in a significant change in the character of the site and be visually intrusive in appearance for the duration of the development. This change would have an unacceptable adverse impact upon visual character and amenities, including for public rights-of-way users, the community, and for the benefit of tourists. The development will neither protect nor enhance this valued landscape, forming part of the designated special landscape area here. On this basis, the proposal would fail to safeguard the landscape quality of this part of the district, contrary to policy CL2 of the adopted Mid-Suffolk Local Plan, and compromising the landscape character and local distinctiveness of the site, contrary to policy CS5 of the adopted core strategy. The proposal would be contrary to the principles of the NPPF, including paragraph 174A and B and paragraph 158, and the development would, for these reasons, not represent sustainable development under paragraph 11 of the NPPF. Thank you, Chairman.
So on that basis, can we please go to vote? And I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Members, that vote is now in progress. Yes, just to confirm, a vote for is for refusal. Thank you, Chair. Members, that's 6 votes for refusal and 1 against. Therefore, that is refused. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so could those that are leaving leave now, because we've got to go straight into another application. So if I could ask you just to leave as quickly as you can so that we can move on to the next item, please. Could I ask that you do leave the chamber as quickly as you can, please, just so we can get on to the next item. Thank you. Okay, so we'll now move on to the next item on the agenda. We're just waiting, we're just waiting for Councillor Byrne to come up and... Sorry, we'll have to wait a minute. Start without the ward member. Okay, so we're going to move straight on to the next application, which is DC 22-04021, which is a planning application in the ward of Palgrave, Mellis Road, Yaxley. Now hand over to the case officer. So Bron, welcome back, and we'll hand over to you to take us through this application.
Thank you. Yes, so this application is for a synchronous condenser. So I'll just start with explaining what that is. So synchronous condensers are a complex of equipment that are necessary to provide grid stability infrastructure, basically. So they look like sort of substation type equipment, other sort of electrical installations, and they ensure that the transition to renewable energy generation is met with stability for the grid. So the transmission of electricity around the grid and between the point of generation to the grid is stabilised by equipment such as synchronous condensers, particularly because features of renewable energy generation are that it's intermittent. So it's not always windy, it's not always sunny, and so you get spikes in electricity generation and lulls equally. So a synchronous condenser is not a generator, it doesn't generate any electricity, but it stores and feeds that energy into the grid at a continuous and even rate, so it sort of stabilises that supply. So that's what a synchronous condenser is. So we'll go through the slides and explain about the site in this particular development. So next slide, please. So the application site is on agricultural land just to the north of Yaxley, and you can see the A140 and I airfield just on the right hand side of this slide. You can also see a winding access route. That is a temporary access for construction purposes. It's currently in place and it's being used to construct the Yaxley substation, which is adjacent to this site. But the operational access will be from Lees Lane, which is to the south. It's just leading up to the site in the centre of the image there. Next slide, please. This is just a wider view of the context of the application site. So you can see Lees Lane in the centre of the slide here, leading northwards up to the application site, the main square of the application site. It then turns around the northern side of the application site and goes off to the northwest, where there's a small cluster of residential properties. Otherwise, you can see the immediate area around the application site is undeveloped agricultural land, and it occupies a fairly elevated, wide open plateau landscape in the countryside. You can also see a larger portion of the I airfield complex, and you can see some of the properties leading into Yaxley along the bottom of the slide. Next slide, please. So the constraints map just gives a bit more policy context to what I've just shown you. You can see the rights of way network in the area. So the footpath network, which goes around the I airfield. You can also see that Lees Lane turns into a bridleway right of way as it leaves the site on the northern side. And there's also a bridleway along Judas Lane to the west of the site. And you can see some of the listed buildings in the area around Yaxley village. There's also listed buildings to the north of the site, which you'll be able to see in another slide a bit later. Next slide, please. This is a layout of the site showing the layout of the equipment. You can also see part of the Yaxley substation site on the left of this image. So that's not part of the development, it's development that's currently under construction, but you can see how this compares to that site there, and you can particularly see how Lees Lane passes along the eastern side of the site and then turns around and crosses the northern part as it heads up to those properties. Next slide, please. So just a slightly wider view showing the context of the proposed development with the site area for the substation, which is currently under construction, and you can see where that connects into one of the pylons, which is in the 400 kV line between Norwich and Bramford. Next slide, please. It's just a bit more detail of the layout of the various equipment, and that the complex would be surrounded by a 2.4 metre high palisade fence. So similar sort of fencing as there is over on the airfield. Next slide, please. This slide and the next slide just showing some elevations of the various elements of the development, and there is a building, an acoustic building to house the parts of the development which are noise generating. That is air insulated, and it has a maximum height of 12 metres, which compares, it's very similar to a building I'm going to show you in a second, which is the building which is the Yaxley substation. So it's similar in appearance to that. It looks like a fairly modern agricultural building or industrial building, so fairly common sort of structure. Less common is the rest of the electrical equipment that you can see here. The Yaxley substation building has a height of 10 metres, so they're similar in scale. Next slide, please. It's just more cross-section elevations through the equipment so that you can see the layout of that. Next slide, please. This slide is just showing a bit more detail of the proposed mitigation planting, so you can see where that is around the site. Next slide, please. This slide gives a wider view of the landscape, so you can see a bit more detail, because some of the issues that have come up in objections, arise from some of the points that you can see on this slide. So Goswald Hall is a listed building which is just to the northeast of the application site and is just marked on there. You can just see it faintly in grey. It's titled Goswald Hall. So where the bridleway, shown in brown here, goes northward and then starts to turn northeast, Goswald Hall is just there. You can also see rights of way which go east to west, shown in green here, footpath rights of way. So there are some images from there, and you can see other things like residential properties shown in the most immediate residential properties shown in pink, and some of the other constraints. So you can see Yaxley Village, and you can start to see parts of Thrandeston, and you can see the airfield, etc. Next slide, please. This slide I've included because it shows you the zone of theoretical visibility that's come from the landscape visual impact assessment that's been submitted. So this helps to explain where within the landscape the development would be visible, with the greatest visibility shown obviously closest to the development in purple, and then the visibility of the development decreasing as you get further away, or depending on the intervening topography, etc., shown in dark blue, mid blue, and then light blue, and then areas of white, and beyond the zone it wouldn't be readily visible. So you've got that information, and you can see some of the viewpoints shown with pink triangles. So I've got some wider landscape views similar to the last presentation, just to show you the landscape setting, which I'll run through in a moment. So if you need to know where those viewpoints are, we've got those here. Next slide, please. So moving into the photos, this is taken from Lees Lane, close to the access. So where the car is parked there, that is the access. So on the right hand side of the slide, where that car, on the opposite side of where the car is, that's the temporary access coming across from the A140, comes to the bottom of the application site, and you can just see some containers and a portable toilet, etc., that was used for the construction compound for the Yaxley substation, and the application site sits just next to that. So next slide, please. So again, looking at the application site beyond this terrace fencing, and you can see the National Grid pylon in the background there as well, and you can see the relative sort of flat plateau landscape character. You can also, just in the background on the right hand side, see towards the residential properties at the end of Lees Lane. Next slide, please. And this is looking from Lees Lane, where it turns into a bridleway directly across, so westwards across the application site. So you can see it's sort of scrubby agricultural. This was taken in summer when it was obviously very dry, but you can see the sort of landscape setting there at close hand. Next slide, please. This is an image of the temporary access from the A140. So this, as I say, is currently being used for the construction of the Yaxley substation, and is proposed to be used for the construction of this development as well, but not for the operational phase. So it would then be stopped up and reinstated. Next slide, please. So a view towards the site from the A140. Next slide, please. So that's the Yaxley substation development as it was currently under construction at the time of this photograph, which was a little while ago. But you can see what I mean about the fairly typical sort of looking industrial agricultural building with the grey panelling. Next slide, please. So that's a wider view looking across towards the Yaxley substation. You can see the site would be adjacent to that. So you've got the setting of the substation, but also you can see the pylons. But you can also, this gives you a sense of how flat the landscape is in this area. Next slide, please. Again, a wider view, just looking over towards the development. You can see more of the pylons there, and again, just a sense of that flat plateau landscape. Next slide, please. So these are some of the views taken from the landscape visual impact assessments. These are the wider landscape views, looking not of the site itself, but looking towards the landscape, towards the site, so you can see how it sits within the landscape. So a view from the 140 towards the site and from the old Norwich Road towards the site. Next slide, please. And from Mellis Road at the top and Judas Lane right of way, respectively, on the bottom, looking over towards the site. Next slide, please. And from Green Lane and the right of way, which is close to Goswald Hall. Next slide, please. And the right of way on the northern side of Goswald Hall and from over at Airfield. Next slide, please. And your officer has some images taken from Goswald Hall because there were concerns about the impact on the setting of Goswald Hall and what the intervisibility between Goswald Hall, this is the building, and the site would be. So this is taken from a first floor window of Goswald Hall itself. Next slide, please. Towards the site, I should say. This is from the garden towards the site. You can just see in the centre background, you can just see a bit of pylon behind that tree line. And the next slide, please, is from the field just to the south of Goswald Hall, so a little bit closer to the site, looking over towards the site. Next slide, please. I think that's it. That is it. Thank you. So you can see in the report that I am explaining what a synchronous condenser is, and also explaining that this type of development is identified as a critical part of the transition to renewable energy generation and net zero, etc., to support the ongoing transmission and stability of the grid. National Grid have a project called Pathfinder, in which they are looking for developments like this to help support ongoing transmission across the network. And this proposal, if it were to be built, would be built as part of the Pathfinder project. There have been a number of concerns that have come from local residents, and particularly Yaxley and Thrandeston parish councils, which I've addressed in the report, and you can see how I've dealt with the various concerns. Particularly, there have been particular issues regarding noise, also the surface water drainage, electromagnetic fields and the impact that that might have on health and amenity, and also the visual and landscape impact of the development. And I've dealt with each of those in the usual way, dealing with the topics and going through the advice that we've received from technical consultees. I should also start by saying that this land is grade 3 agricultural land, and we don't have information submitted to confirm whether or not it's 3A or 3B, so whether or not it's best and most versatile. So you'll see in the report that I have dealt with it on the assumption that it is best and most versatile. But similarly to the application that you heard previously, it's a relatively small area. It is constrained to a degree by the way that Lees Lane travels around it and sort of encloses it, and obviously the Yaxley substation compound to the west as well. So we're concluding that there would not be a reason on the basis of loss of best and most versatile to warrant refusal of the application, but we are assuming it is best and most versatile in the absence of any information to demonstrate otherwise. The highways impacts, as I said, using the temporary access from the 140, and then after that using, for operational period, just using Lees Lane, and the traffic for operational period is expected to be personal car or small van, perhaps occasional visits, sort of once a month or so, just to inspect and maintain. But otherwise, the development is generally operated and maintained remotely, so it's unmanned. You can see some concerns that I've covered about the landscape and visual impact, and as well as the heritage impact, but hopefully you'll appreciate from the images that I've shown what the character of the landscape is, that the proposal includes mitigation in terms of planting, and that it sits in context with the Yaxley substation and close proximity to that. So overall, the wider views are going to be seeing those two things together, which has the effect of ameliorating the overall impact. In terms of noise and other public health and safety impacts, so concerns have been raised about noise, and particularly whether there's been enough information provided. We've had a noise assessment submitted, which includes cumulative assessment to take in the impacts of the substation as well. We have the information submitted explains that the development would be in an acoustic building to mitigate the noise impact from the development, and that the conclusion is that there was no observed adverse effect. So that's basically the lowest impact outcome that would come from a noise assessment. Your environmental health officers have had a look at the proposal and are satisfied that the information that is submitted is sufficient in order to make a decision, and we have a recommendation from them to, if we're going to grant permission, to include a condition to ensure that once the installation is operated, that it's tested, and to demonstrate that the predicted noise levels are achieved, and that if those levels are not achieved, that attenuation measures are agreed to ensure that the predicted sound levels are not exceeded. That's in your recommendation. EMF similarly, I've covered that. I've got a section in there just to explain that the EMF produced by the development is generally considered to be negligible. It's the same sort of thing as any other kind of electrical equipment like substations, etc., or a large generator, and that there are separate regulations that govern the installation of electrical equipment that would not need to be duplicated by planning, and give you the comfort that the installation would be carried out as it should be. So I'm just looking to see what else I've got in terms of oh, that's right. So the other thing one of the other things that the parish council had concerns about was the surface water flood risk, and we had quite extensive interaction between the applicant and the lead local flood authority, Suffolk County Council, on the basis of surface water, and the applicant has provided detailed information on infiltration rates, and that has now satisfied the technical advisor in terms of the information to be provided, and that subject to a condition to secure an appropriate strategy for dealing with surface water, that there would not be a reason to refuse the development. So that's sort of an overview of the main issues and impacts. You can see the rest in the report, obviously, so I'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, any questions to the case officer? Councillor Matheson and then Councillor Phillips.
Yeah, I think my questions are going to be for the applicant. I just want to make sure the applicant is with us. Good, thank you.
Councillor Field.
Thank you. Just perhaps to dispel a bit of my ignorance. Not quite clear why something to add inertia to the grid and provide reactive current compensation was necessary at this particular location. So could you tell me what actually connects at the Yaxley substation? I'm not aware of what that is. Perhaps I should be.
Yes, so the location for synchronous condenser type development, so grid stability development, it needs to be within proximity of a grid supply point. So the Yaxley substation is that grid supply point. The further from that point, the less effective it would be, certainly, but also the less likely it would be to be awarded a contract from the grid under Pathfinder. So that's why it's located here. Connection for Yaxley substation, it's associated with the Progress Power development. It's part of that that development. Does that answer?
Well, was Progress Power a gas-fired power station?
It is.
And that would have lots of rotation and inertia in any case. So just,
but this
I'm sure that perhaps I should stop there. Obviously, you won't be able to cover that.
can ask the applicant if you've got technical questions.
Will do, yes. Okay. Thank you. And your consideration on noise, your awareness operation noise assessment means an assessment and action to ensure the noise reaches sensible levels, because very competent noise report you had did seem to suggest noise close to the building was pretty high.
Yeah, so we're recommending that once everything's installed, it's tested for operation to check that it complies with the assessment, with the outcome of the assessment, and in the event that it doesn't, that relevant attenuation is a scheme for attenuation is submitted and approved to ensure that it doesn't exceed those predicted levels.
Councillor Eburn, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Bron, for your presentation. Yeah, I was just going to check that the reason for it being here is because it has to be next to the substation, so that's answered. But the noise issue, do you have any detail on what the noise is in relation to the substation noise, as to whether it's similar, more or less, or whatever? And can you just, I wrote down the heights, but I just wanted to double check. You're saying the substation is about 10 metres high, and the highest point of this would be about 12, so just 2 metres difference. Is that correct?
Yes, so the substation is 10.5 to its highest point, and the highest point of the building would be 12.
Okay,
yeah.
so 10.5 and 12, great. So that just the question about the noise versus the noise from the substation, and also in the conditions it's got about landscaping, and I just noticed that it's quite open, some of the area, but could you just give a bit more view on what that type of landscaping would entail? Thanks very much.
I'm going to come back to you on the noise, because I just need to open the noise assessment. It did include a cumulative assessment, but if you want some figures, I need to just open that up and come back to you if it's okay, please.
Or just something that gives us an understanding, so whether if it's a bit louder or quieter, similar kind of thing. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I'll find that in a moment. On landscaping, let me get a bit more detail on that as well. Hang on a second. Okay, so the scheme that we have proposed, if I could ask Alicia please to go to slide 10. So you'll see in the recommendation that notwithstanding the detail that we have here, we are asking for more specific detail to be agreed so that we know exactly what we're getting, because I know that the members also have concerns about specific species and things like that. So we'll get that extent of detail by condition. But you can see here the areas of woodland, so proposed native woodland planting in these sort of bubbled areas, and some hedgerow as well. So a mixture of those across along all boundaries, except for there's a tiny bit on this side, obviously, but with the substation, it's less so on that side.
So to be conditioned, the details to be conditioned.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And on the noise, do you want to come back to us on that, Bron?
Can I come back to you in a second? Yes,
yeah, no problem at all. Okay, Councillor Mansell, you're next.
Thank you. I'd just like to clarify my understanding of the planning history, and then there's a sort of follow-up question. I understand that the actual substation was part of the Progress Power Station, whatever it is, which doesn't appear to be a sort of normal planning process. And if I'm right in that, it seems to have sort of, in your report, it didn't have a number or anything. So is there something that has changed in Progress Power's operation that now requires this, or should this, or was this anticipated when the whole Progress Power thing got permission?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so Progress Power and the substation as part of that are an NSIP, so Nationally Significant Infrastructure Project. So it is, the planning process is slightly different because it's determined by the planning inspectorate, and Mid Suffolk District Council were a consultee rather than a determining authority as part of that. But it's dealt with under planning legislation, the Planning Act, rather than Town and Country Planning Act. It's just a different bit, but it's a similar sort of thing. So they have a development consent order, which is similar to a planning permission. They have, on that consent, they have a series of requirements which are similar to conditions. One of those requirements was the details of the substation, and so that was all sort of comprised in that. It's the same process in terms of participation. It's just a different person making the decision. So community participation, etc. There's the same opportunities to engage with the decision-making process. This proposal is not actually associated with Progress Power. This is not necessary for Progress Power. They're not interlinked in that way. This is to provide grid stability, and the opportunity has arisen because there is a new grid supply point as a result of Yaxley substation. So the stability will be provided across the whole of the transmission network in the area, and this is just the point at which that is happening on that network. All of the connectivity that increases the risk of instability is predominantly all of the offshore wind that we have in the area. So things like Sheringham Shoal, Galloper, Dudgeon, all of those, which we obviously have the commitment to increase all the offshore wind generation, but that intermittent generation and supply to the grid has the knock-on effect of risking stability. So we're seeing an increase in proposals for stability infrastructure like this, and they need to go where there's a grid supply point, and there's not many grid supply points across the transmission network. We've just been speaking about another one at Bramford, and there's a handful of others across our district, but that's the reason for it going here.
Thank you very much. Councillor Passmore, you were next.
Yeah, just a quick one. Has any of the work already started? Because I drive past the exercise. Just to clarify, none of the work has started, the access road or anything like that at all?
The access road is in because it's being used for the construction of Yaxley substation. Yaxley substation is nearly complete. So the building that I showed you in the photo, that's the Yaxley substation. But for this development, nothing of this development has started. And the temporary access for Yaxley sub will be used by this development as well. But right. Apart from that, nothing.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Byrne, you have a question.
Actually, it wasn't a question, Chairman. I just wondered whether, because of my experience as the ward member and the fact that I was heavily involved with the Progress Power application, whether I could add a little bit to the raison d'etre or the rationale behind the substation. I think when it was mooted.
I think you can hold that for your ward member. You can hold that back for your ward member's statement.
Right. Well, I won't bother including it in that case. It was just that.
I think that'd be the time to put it in.
Sorry?
I think that's the time because it's talking about the bigger picture as part of the ward. Thank you. Any other points of clarity before we move on? No? Okay. So we'll move on to the Parish Council. We have Mr. Freeman. Welcome. You have 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
I hope I've pressed the right button there. Can I just correct Ms. Curtis on one point, please, before we go any further? The access to the substation is with an agreement with the Yaxley Parish Council. There is no agreement with Conrad Energy at this stage for them to use that access. So that is incorrect statement, just to put that correct. Can I just also ask if I've got 6 minutes because I'm representing 2 parish councils? Okay. Yaxley Parish Council objects to this application being heard at this time as it has not received a response to its Freedom of Information request. The last meeting of the Parish Council was attended by representatives of Conrad Energy who were unable to give the information that the Parish Council required. The Parish Council sent a series of points for clarification, which you should have seen, which when returned were unsatisfactory. The Parish Council had no choice but to make a Freedom of Information request in the hope of obtaining answers to its questions. The Parish Council was promised a response to this request Freedom of Information request yesterday, which did not materialise. I, at that stage, was considering an injunction against this meeting continuing. We took legal advice and that hasn't gone ahead. The Parish Council has never been provided with all the information it required, and now it's been let down by Mid Suffolk District Council. The only way to resolve this is to adjourn this meeting, and hopefully Mid Suffolk will provide the documents which the Parish Council has asked for, and it will allow the Parish Council to make informed decisions and to decide on whether it wishes to continue to object to this application. The Parish Council has given Conrad Energy every opportunity to explain its situation. We've had 3 Parish Council meetings to which they were invited, and also an on-site meeting. At the last meeting, we were frequently told they couldn't tell us the answers to the questions which we had been asking for some time. There are other points which I'd make, but I see I'm running short of time. One thing I would draw your attention to is this dismissal of the flooding issue, which, if you look at the photographs, you won't have seen the videos, is a very extreme problem in the area, caused not by just this, but also by the increased amount of hard-standing, impervious surfaces on Eye Airfield. And landowners and farmers and people associated with River Waveney are very concerned about it.
Thank you very
3
much.
minutes up.
Thank you. So we've received, you did write to us asking us to suspend the meeting. I have raised that with officers. The view is that we've done everything correctly and the meeting can proceed. Is that correct?
Yes, Chairman. I was made aware of the correspondence yesterday and repeat the advice I gave to the officers who spoke to me. This meeting's been properly summoned and papers have been sent out. In these matters, parish councils are always, there's a duty to notify the parish council of the planning application. That has been done. It's not the fact that there might be I've no knowledge of the detail of time, dates and time limits on the Freedom of Information request. The fact that there may be an outstanding Freedom of Information request is not a reason in itself automatically to defer a meeting or remove an item from the agenda. And as you're aware, Chairman, when we publish an agenda, that is the agenda. It's not, as you'll also, all members of the committee will recall, it does happen very occasionally that there's something unforeseen happens and we agree with you as chairman that the officers won't present a report. Then we ring round, email round and say to the parish council applicants, I'm sorry, no point you coming. I think, as you're also well aware, it's not unknown for this committee to defer its decision on an item because you feel you haven't got enough information, there are unanswered questions, and that has cropped up from time to time on highways, heritage, it could on any issue. But that's your decision as the councillors who have the duty to make the decision. That's all I can say, really.
Okay, so on that basis, we will be continuing. Any questions?
Yeah, on that useful points there. What can I ask the parish council representative? What sort of information that is being sought but has not been provided? I mean, it may be relevant to their view about the thing, but is it relevant to us? Is it information that we ought to have as a committee?
So what is the document you're waiting to see?
Well, it's not specifically a document, it's waiting for information that we've asked for.
On what?
I was just going to explain that, if you just give me a moment. And we're waiting to know why this cannot be built on Eye Airfield, because the concern is that now with the substation there, and now another...
I'm going to stop you.
But I'm explaining
I'm sorry, I'm stopping you. Thank you very much. We are only looking at the applications that are before us. The application could be anywhere else. That's not relevant. We can only, as a committee, look what is before us, and it is on this site before us. So I'm not going to ask you to continue. Thank you. I believe that covers it. We are only allowed to look at what is before us, not alternative places for it. That's the rule of planning, I'm afraid.
I'm sorry, I was going to get to that, but you cut me off before that point.
Thank you very much. If you turn your microphone off. Councillor Field.
You mentioned that you're looking for noise data. I was just going to say, I'm sure I saw a quite comprehensive noise report in the online. Is that not adequate for you?
Do you just want to come in on noise? Because actually Bron's just going to come in on that point.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So there is a noise assessment that's been submitted, which includes a cumulative noise assessment. Councillor Eburn asked about a comparison for noise levels, so I've just picked that out of that assessment. The substation is in the region of 80 decibels. And this is very rough, obviously, because as you know, noise depends on various different factors. This is just very sort of ballpark. So 80 decibels for the substation typically, and the highest sound for the various equipment in synchronous condenser development, 92. But the thing to bear in mind is that what we're asking for, and what they've said that they can demonstrate, is that the level of operational noise would not exceed the existing background noise level. So that is the existing noise level that's experienced at the various sensitive receptors, those residential properties that were measured. And the condition is asking to ensure that they demonstrate that operationally the development doesn't exceed that, and if it's shown to exceed that, that they then carry out attenuation measures that they agree with us, with our environmental health team, to ensure that level is kept to no greater than existing background.
Thank you. Councillor Mansell, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned concerns about floods, and I'm just looking at section 11 of our report, which our consultee about floods has said that they don't consider any unacceptable flood risk. So could you explain why you're not happy with why you disagree with our floods consultant?
You should have seen photographs of the flooding in adjacent fields, which has worsened in recent years, and it is as a result of what is happening on our airfield, but also there are now going to be 2 impervious areas on this local land, which is likely to cause an increase in flooding on that land. I hope you've seen those photographs, because I have sent them in, and there was also a video attached showing the impact. The only referral back was that it was stated that this has been a wet autumn, which is incorrect. I have weather data on the area, which I can refer to, which shows that that is an incorrect statement. In fact, if you think back to last summer, how dry the period was, and therefore the rain this autumn and again into the winter. And remember that the autumn is September to November in meteorological terms, and winter is December to February. And in the winter period, again, the rainfall now, thinking we've not had any rain for well over 20 days, is very low again. But flooding has occurred.
Thank you. Any other questions for the Parish Council? No? Okay. Thank you very much. Next, we'll move on to the ward member, because we have no objection, no support. Sorry, I'm wrong. We have no objection, no support. Now we go to the applicant. And again, you have 3 minutes, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Cooper, and I work for Comrade Energy, who are an owner and operator of energy assets in the UK. The proposal in front of you today is a direct response to the climate and energy crisis being faced within the UK. In the past 12 months, unprecedented energy prices caused by geopolitical events have threatened the security of our energy supply and resulted in an increase in UK household fuel poverty. Just last week, the UK government set up the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero to provide dedicated leadership on the UK's energy supply. National Grid, as the UK electricity system operator, is adapting our grid network for the transition of our sources of power away from traditional fossil fuel generation, including coal and gas, to renewable forms of power, primarily wind and solar generation. As a result of this transition, changes are required to maintain a stable, functional grid network with solutions such as synchronous condensers. The Pathfinder 3 initiative from National Grid seeks to meet these changes by procuring grid stability services from carbon-free sources via third-party contracts to address changes in the current and frequency of the grid. The Pathfinder 3 contracts are estimated to save UK energy consumers an estimated £15 billion by 2035 and avoid significant carbon emissions. In their Pathfinder procurement, National Grid identified 5 regions of need, including the east of England, where within the next decade, nearly 10 gigawatts of offshore wind generation is proposed. These contracts have now been awarded, including to the proposed site before you. National Grid based their decision on a combination of cost to the consumer and effectiveness of solutions to meet their requirement for grid stability. The area chosen for this technology was selected due to the connection point into the new Yaxley substation identified by National Grid, and the final site location is based off the proximity to the substation, which is directly related to the effectiveness to respond to faults, as well as considerations on topography, ground conditions, access routes, and commercial availability. The chosen site benefits from existing and proposed screening, and the development has been designed with an aesthetic comparable to the Yaxley substation and to a modern agricultural barn, not dissimilar to those found in the region. The submitted technical reports have demonstrated a negligible impact on noise, flooding, visual impact, ecology, transport and safety. We have no objections to the scheme from any technical quantity on this ground and are compliant with local and national planning policy. We've listened closely to the concerns raised with regards to the application and have sought to address these where possible. We intend to continue working with the community throughout the project lifecycle. In conclusion, this project is set to play an important role in fulfilling National Grid's requirement for a stable and functioning UK electricity network as the country continues on a path of delivering net zero. Noting the recommendation for approval in your officer's report, we hope that members recognise the clear need and benefits of the scheme to approve the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions? I guess a question that comes out of what the Parish Council asked is, did you consider alternative sites, or does this have to be located right next to the existing site?
So the identification of Yaxley substation has come straight from National Grid in the Pathfinder process. I mentioned about the 5 regions of need, where in each of these regions there's a requirement for these stability services based on the renewables available. An identified substation has a place where we can connect into, and then if you were to connect into a substation which didn't have an available bay to connect into, it's a significant increase in terms of the time to get a connection onto there, the cost, which is ultimately passed back to the British public, and disruption. So that's was the reasoning around the substation itself.
Yeah, we heard that the new facility will be under contract to National Grid. Does the contract come before or after the facility is built?
The contract will come into effect after the National Grid substation has been erected and in operation.
Not what I'm saying. I mean, the synchronised, whatever it is, condenser, will that be built before you get the contract, or will it be built after you're awarded the contract?
So the contract has now been awarded to Comrade Energy and to a handful of other services across the region.
So there's certainty of use. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Matheson.
Thank you. Yeah, these relative locations and so on. I mean, in terms of electricity transmission losses, which is presumably what the National Grid are concerned about. I mean, the airfield site is what, 300 metres or 500 metres or something away, which electricity transmission terms is insignificant in itself. But you know, is it nevertheless significantly worse to put it on the airfield site than it is to put it where it's proposed?
So the proximity to the substation is the number one consideration in terms of the effectiveness of the technology, and then that has been determined by National Grid themselves, who will have applied an algorithm on the effectiveness of solutions presented to them and the cost, which is passed on to the British consumers.
I think we've got to be careful because we can only look at what is before us. We can't go off on, it could be better somewhere else. That's not what we can do as a committee. So please, can I just remind members of that? Yeah, I know. We've gone down a bit, but I do need to remind us. Yeah. Councillor Eburn and Councillor Field.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question for the officer, Ron, just on the flooding issue. The SUDS, I noticed on the landscape diagram, there's the SUDS basin. And just to confirm that that does meet the, or which level of flooding requirement does that meet is probably my question. Thanks.
Yeah, so the usual expectation is that the calculation is on the basis of a 1 in 100 event for rainfall. But you'll see from the advice from County that we're still asking for specific details of a drainage strategy to be agreed by condition. So whilst we have some information which is demonstrating that it's practicable, we want to just be precise about exactly what we're securing.
Councillor Field.
A question about the noise, perhaps first. The report, I believe, says that the impact on the nearest receptors, who are some way away, is, as you say, negligible, a dB or so. But the noise level you're quoting, or one was quoting, adjacent to the building, seems to be around the level at which hearing damage occurs. So just, you know, how does your reasoning go on that? That this is a rural area, so it doesn't matter what the noise level is, except at the houses or whatever?
So noise assessment we have submitted has taken into effect the cumulative impacts with our site and the Yaxley substation. It's captured the output of our plant, all the operational equipment, and against the background levels, and we are conforming with British standard and national policy as confirmed by the Environmental Health Officer.
But the background levels where?
So the background levels will have been measured from the nearest residential receptors.
Which are how far from this equipment?
I believe it's approximately 200 to 300 metres away. I may be wrong on that.
Thank you. And the reason for
We've got a map, John. Do you want to have a look at it? We've got a map, environmental.
I did look yesterday. The second thing is the reason for connection here is the grid connection. That's presumably not just that the wires are available at ground level. Does it include the transformers and things, the need for those that exist within the Yaxley substation? Or does this synchronous motor actually work at, well, I'm sure it doesn't work at 400 kV, but...
I'm sorry, can I just clarify on your question?
Yes, I'm just saying we're trying to understand why it has to be here. Clearly there's the issue of wires which connect from the 400 kV overhead lines to ground level where your motor sits. But I was wondering if that motor works at relatively low voltage, 33 kV or something, and therefore requires other equipment which is to translate its voltage to the higher level of the grid itself.
We do have transformers as part of the scheme, but the connection point into the substation, we can only connect into a grid supply point for this type of technology, of which National Grid have only identified 3 within the region, which have these bays available to connect into, of which all 3 have projects now contracted for.
Thank you. And the plans show a current transformer, that's what you're talking about? Current transformers, I'm not familiar with being used in that sort of location.
Yes, that's the purpose of the transformer, to step up the voltage.
No, that's not a current transformer then, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay, so we'll move on. Next up is the ward member, Councillor Byrne. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clear up the Yaxley substation size, it is larger than it needs to be to connect the gas-fired power station, the Progress Power gas-fired power station. This is because at the time it was it was National Grid's decision to make it larger in anticipation of the requirement for further connections. Simple as that. And cost efficiency says the bigger the better. So it was larger than was required for Progress Power. Right, thank you. I'll do my best to get through this. This has been a complex and technical application for interested and affected parties to assess. It's not surprising that those with no prior knowledge of electrical engineering have found it difficult. This unfamiliarity imbues within us a sense of reverence for the subject, and it is unsurprising that we think that those who are more informed must know what they're talking about, even if we don't. The problem is that this reverence puts us at a disadvantage when it comes to challenging an application like this, and it must be difficult for those on the other side to resist taking advantage of our relative ignorance by being selective and slow with what they choose to disclose. You've heard that this has left Yaxley Parish Council in particular lacking vital information before being allowed its 3 minutes today to persuade you of its case. However, fortunately, a resident in the area has stepped forward to offer advice which has considerably helped some of us to counter the disadvantage. Quite fortuitously, his professional qualifications and working experience with synchronous condensers make him, in my eyes, an expert witness in the present context. He wrote, and I quote, "I have constructed several synchronous condensers and energy centres as part of my role as Senior Project Manager, Infrastructure Lead in Wembley, London. And he's provided invaluable information to individuals in the area since his original representation to Mid-Suffolk." Much of what this gentleman has said informed Mrs. Fleming's lobbying email which was sent to you yesterday, and I will be drawing on some of it here. It is the landscape impact that is felt to be the most damaging, pointing out the fact that the substation was originally to be situated within an ancient field pattern that was accepted as being of regional, if not national significance, was sufficient to persuade National Grid to change the substation configuration from their preferred air-insulated open-air version with all its tall gantries, insulators and switchgear covering a large area, to a smaller gas-insulated type contained within a building covering a much smaller area. There is scant mention of this Iron Age field pattern in section 6 of the Officer's Report on Landscape and Visual Impacts. In fact, 6.4 it says, "Your officers conclude that the area is not a valued landscape in the NPPF sense," so it is qualified. I think there are three main questions to be answered here. Is this an appropriate site? A key question is what informed Conrad Energy's choice of site for this development? A question that the applicant seems never to have fully answered. On this point, our local expert, if I may call him that, tells us that National Grid will advise on a position to connect into the grid. However, I cannot see, and this is the expert, my expert talking, I cannot see that the planners have been informed how this question was asked by the applicant. If you ask National Grid if you can connect into Yaxley, as it is, and is it appropriate, then their answer will be yes. And this is because the condenser can be put almost anywhere on the network. The second question of my three is this the best location? I realise that this is the location we've been offered, but although the decision has to be taken on the basis of this location, it could be a refusal on the basis of this location. I just give you that as a possibility. So on is this the best location? On this point, our expert says this is determined by the efficiency of the kit being in that location if it were looked at purely based on the benefit to the grid. As I, that's himself speaking, construct these, the benefit to the grid is not always the number one priority. Cost is a factor. The location proposed is undoubtedly the most cost-effective way of installing this. It is a greenfield site with negligible contamination, easy construction, etc. It's a very good site from a cost perspective. As I have not seen Conrad's calcs and technical details, I have no way of determining that this site is the best location for the condenser on the network. It is unlikely that this is the case, based on experience, and Conrad should be required to provide their evidence based on their studies for alternative sightings of the condenser, showing that alternatives have been looked at and if discounted, including why. And the third is within section 9 of the officer's report, which is on residential amenity. Paras 9.4 to 9.6 consider noise. The applicant's assessment concludes that, together with the substation, there will be no observed adverse effect. However, the advice I have received from my expert, as I call him, condensers can be noisy based on the working load setting. You should note that Yaxley is very quiet at night time with very little noise pollution. Introducing this so close to residential dwellings could significantly affect the nighttime noise pollution for the area. The planners should dig deep into these proposals and ask for evidence regarding when baseline noises were taken and assurances by way of conditions on the grant, should planning be granted, that noise does not exceed existing levels. And this, if I may make this point, this differs, this is me speaking now, this differs from the suggested condition in the report that noise accords with the predictions in the assessment. And back to my expert in Yaxley, if Conrad has the freedom to run this at full speed whenever required, a dull drone will be heard through the night, reducing living standards to proximity dwellings. Noise travels far and wide, and I would not expect this consent to be granted if I was making the application. And the fourth, there was a fourth question, is this appropriate hardware? An alternative is a capacitor bank. This performs a similar role, but is not as cost-effective to the applicant as maintenance costs are higher. The benefits could be a smaller footprint and less noise. So my conclusion, I'm at the conclusion now, thankfully. As I see it, there are many questions that have been asked by affected parties but remain either unanswered or not answered satisfactorily. Without these answered, reasoned cases cannot be made, nor can a determination be based on sufficient and adequate information. The deficient areas can be summarised as follows. 1. Demonstrate that studies on alternate brownfield or industrial sites have been reviewed and dismissed, including the reason. 2. Provide calculations and technical data for the siting against alternatives to show that this is the optimal location. 3. Provide existing dB/noise monitoring and readings of the proposed area both day and night over a period of 14 days to determine existing ambient noise levels. And 4. Demonstrate the best and worst changes in ambient noise both day and night for the proposed completed construction. And in my opinion, and that's me, only when this information is available to officers, supporters and objectors alike will it be safe to make a fully reasoned decision on this application. Therefore, I feel that the only safe decision for you to make today is deferral or refusal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was 10 minutes. Members, any questions or comments for Councillor Byrne? No? Okay. Thank you very much. Right, members, we've had all the information put before us. Over to us to discuss, debate and come to a conclusion. Yes, Councillor Matheson and Councillor Field.
Yeah, as I was reading the report, I gradually became uncomfortable how heavily the arguments of principle and so on were resting upon renewable energy, etc., etc. And I became increasingly dubious about that. But I think having heard the arguments and the presentation, I'm more comfortable about that. But I am not, I think that Councillor Byrne has alluded to some of the history, and I seem to recall that there was, when the power station was being proposed and so on, there was quite the argument about we've allocated this huge piece of land, airfield, for industrial and commercial purposes, why isn't it going there? And I think I'm left with the residue of that. That I've put aside the suspicion that this is being put here to serve the gas power station, okay, accepting that's not the case. The problem is the only 3 points, grid supply points, that National Grid have put forward in the region. I'm not quite sure how big the region is, but I think it tends to suggest it's several counties at least. So I'm now really still uneasy as to whether it is just a cost consideration. It's a bit cheaper to put it on this greenfield site than it is to get an appropriate piece of land on our airfield to put that. And the grid may want it to be next to the substation, but how much of a problem is that actually in terms of the connectivity and the transmission? I can't feel as if I've got the answer to that at the moment, really.
Councillor Field and Councillor Humphreys.
I have similar views. I was concerned reading the paper that there was a lot about renewable energy and its generation thereupon, and yet this device generates no energy at all. It generates reactive current to compensate for that which exists on the network. But one can accept that with wind farms switching on and offload quite rapidly, there may be quite substantial phase transitions that you do need to compensate. However, my electrical engineering, as you all know, is pretty out of date. It comes from 50 years ago when the network wasn't that different, but there you go. I can't help but feel that the case has been made quite powerfully that there's a range of information that's been requested and it hasn't yet been delivered. So I'm inclined to the feeling that yes, we should defer until we have some real proof of the sort of information that the ward member and the parish council requires. None of it sounds that unreasonable. I think I've analysed slightly the noise myself, and that has some good 3D modelling in it, but it does show that noise close to the plant is high, and that further away from the plant is clearly a lot less. It drops by 3 dBs every time the distance doubles, so yes, you'd expect it to be less in the distance, but haven't really investigated just how quiet you could make or how noisy this will be adjacent to the machinery itself, which is in the countryside, but nevertheless people walk around there. The issue on EMF fields, I've certainly got some papers on that somewhere, so I'm sure that could be obtained quite readily. The prime one is, as been said, is just why does this have to be just here, not perhaps 200 or 300 yards away? The electricity isn't going to change in phase very much over that sort of distance. So one would want someone who knows what they're talking about to produce that sort of data for us. So I'm very tempted to move deferral, but I think I would wait to hear what other members feel before I do that.
I'm just going to have to remind you we can only look at what's before us today, not where else it could be.
Yes, indeed, but it's the question is why is it here, not why is it at...
It's here, and the applicant's chosen to apply here, and that's really where we go.
And if I argue too much, it'll finish up at Bramford.
Councillor Humphreys.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So I've learnt a lot today. I didn't know what a synchronous condenser was. So that's very interesting. And it does say here that really it's for storage, consistency of electrical supply during periods of no or low generation, which we're going to get with this renewable energy. So everyone thinks it's magic. It's not. It has its flaws. And one of them is that it doesn't always work, doesn't always give you what you want. So this system is definitely needed because it provides that stability and the electricity supply in those periods of low productivity. So there's a reason for it. So that's the first point. The second point is it is where it is because, as the Chairman's just said, that's where the application is. And it's there for a lot of reasons. One, it's close to the subsystem, to the substation, and that's where they've been granted, and they've spoken to National Grid. That's where they've concluded it's going to be. And it's before us. So we could all argue that it could be somewhere else, but it is where it is. So I think there's a need. It is where it is. The noise side of it, there's been a study done on noise, and one of the conditions of the recommendation is that they'll do an operational noise assessment as well. So that's captured within the conditions. To me, because there's a need, and because we seem to be driving towards this net zero and the renewable energy thing, for me that gets my support. It is what it is. I can't find any reason to say no.
Proposing or just listening?
Do you know what? I should go where my mouth speaks, shouldn't I? So I will propose approval as set down in the conditions, because I think it is what it is.
Thank you. Councillor Passmore, you were next.
Yeah, I've listened to all the discussions. I am actually rather concerned. I do actually know Goswald Hall quite well because I used to have some friends that lived there. I have to say that the size of this building going up is pretty big, and I am concerned with the impact it has on the visual amenity of the area. I do agree with the ward member David Burns, so I am not comfortable. I know it's got to go somewhere, I guess, I know that, and we've got to look at the application as it is. But I just think the impact there is potentially quite damaging for local people, and I would like to know a bit more about the details before I would be able to support it. So at the moment, I'm not able to support it.
Anyone else wish to speak? Yes, Councillor Mayor.
Yeah, visual impact is a concern. There's no mention of the use of graduated shading on the 12-metre sides. I think that would be a positive, especially if we manage not to have a large red sign slapped on the side of it. For me, it comes down to noise, and I'm not sure the conditioning is strong enough. Can we provide the ambient noise measurement and use that as a baseline and link further operation to not exceeding those levels? So there's enforcement haven't got any wriggle room. That is the ambient level now, and you're exceeding it, operation has to stop. Can we be as draconian, or not draconian, as firm as that?
Okay, can I just check? I do need a seconder. Do I have a seconder at all?
I would second if we can tie down the noise condition.
Okay.
Tightly.
We'll pick that up. Okay. Do you want to come in on the noise?
Well, I was just going to say, I think we've still got Susan Leonard here from Environmental Health who might give some more advice on the noise condition.
Hello there. So I'm so sorry, my voice is a little bit iffy today. So I hope I can make sense. In answer to the question on the proposed noise condition, as Bron has indicated, what we are asking of the applicant is something that we're doing on more and more applications, which is to verify or validate that the noise level, that basically what they're proposing isn't going to adversely impact the nearest noise sensitive dwellings, the residential locality. And what we're asking for in this instance is that the level doesn't exceed, as you say, the background noise level. Yes, it would be possible to specify that within the wording of a condition, but essentially we would want the applicant to demonstrate that the noise mitigation or attenuation proposed affords that level of protection by carrying out an assessment once the equipment is all in situ and any enclosures or mitigation is put into place.
So basically that will follow up, but you can assure the committee that that work will take place once the project moves forward, if it's given permission. The mitigation, you will be monitoring and making sure it meets the requirements of which you lay out in terms of background noise.
We would ask that the applicant provides an assessment post installation prior to it coming into beneficial use, that when operational it doesn't exceed the current background noise levels. That would be something that would be expected from the applicant.
Councillor Mayor's just got a question.
Seems strange that we're asking the applicant to provide the assessed noise levels. Shouldn't they be assessed by a third party? So if the applicant says the noise levels are okay, it's okay.
We would obviously need to see the results of the assessment and make a judgment on the basis of what we see. But essentially, if an applicant says that you know, that they would have an independent company, acoustic consultant, who would undertake that work on their behalf, if the report comes back and says that levels accord with that they don't exceed the background, and we accept that, if there were exceedances in the future, then that would come down to a breach of a planning condition.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, if you a couple more questions.
Yeah, I mean, are we comfortable? Is the officer comfortable that that further mitigation is technically achievable in these circumstances if it turns out that the noise levels are as Councillor Mayer's worrying?
Yeah, in terms of mitigation, obviously what's been proposed thus far, the applicant has indicated that it will achieve that. But what we're seeking to do is, obviously, if for any reason it doesn't, then we would want to see a further scheme of mitigation. So there would be further mitigation that would be, you know, achievable.
Thank you for that. Councillor Mansell, you had a question.
No, I was going to voice my opinion as part of the debate. Am I allowed to do that?
Does anyone have any further questions on noise while we've got the officer? Thank you for your, I hope your voice is all right. But thank you for that. Appreciate it. Right, Councillor Mansell and Councillor Eburn.
Thank you. I must admit, I think I've learnt a bit more about what this application is about. Before I came to the meeting, I thought that this synchronous condenser was somehow associated with the transformer connection to the grid. And I've now discovered that it isn't really, and it could go anywhere. And I've listened to what other people have had to say about this particular location, notwithstanding anything else that might have been discussed about other places it could go, is that wherever it goes, it's going to not be a pleasant situation, because the very nature of the development is it's not going to be next to where anyone lives. It's likely to be in a bit of open countryside near a national grid line. Okay, it could be in a sort of industrial complex where it would be better sited, but I think wherever it goes, it's not going to be ideal. It's just one of these things that modern society has made a necessity. However, I do think that there are some questions that haven't been answered, and maybe we could do with a little bit more information about some of those aspects, as has been highlighted by the parish and the ward member, and Councillor Field also thought he needed more information, and I bow to his superior knowledge on electricity generation and distribution. So I think I'm not too sure about it, but I think on balance, I think maybe some more clarity over the information would help. So unusually, I think I'm heading towards a deferral type thing, rather than
Councillor
going
Humphreys
along
has
with
just raised his hand and wants to come back in, so thank you for that.
Mr. Chair, thank you. So on reflection, having listened to other people, it's obvious the way it's going. We haven't got a second there. So
we have Councillor Mayer second.
Did you actually? So did you get satisfied with your answer? Yeah. All right, Councillor last.
Okay. We will go to the vote, but Councillor Eburn wanted to speak. Then we'll go to the vote. Then we'll see where that goes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm slightly of the opposite view of my colleague on my right, because I think we run the risk of trying to understand how, you know, I remember my physics lessons from schools, but we run the risk of trying to become electrical engineering experts, and that's not what we should be doing here today. We should be looking at the planning application in front of us and the views that we've had from the experts that we as a district council are obliged to get, and then we make a balanced view. And I'm of the view that that more information will be more information. My personal view is we have enough information here today to make a decision, and I think also it's beholden on us to make a decision, and it's not good for not just the applicant, but also for people, the local people, to put off and put off and put off. You know, we heard earlier they were saying 2.5 years. You know, let's just kind of, you know, I think, you know, we should be making decisions, but that's my personal view. The things that I've got a concern about are, I'm not so concerned about the heights now, because farming sheds these days are massive, and they are just put in the middle of nowhere. There's one near me that's on a nice rise, and they're just able to put up a 12-metre, 15-metre high shed. Boom, nothing, you know, it's just no problem, despite the fact it's replacing a 1950s pigsty, you know, it's kind of... So we've got 12-metre high shed next to a 10.5-metre high shed, but my more concern with that is ensuring we've got the landscaping around it, and that the landscaping is significant and not just the odd hedge that in a 15 years' time might be my height kind of thing. I too, like Councillor Passmore, I remember standing in the driveway of Goswald Hall looking at the site for wind turbines on our airfield, and us debating whether what was going to be the impact of those. And now there's wind turbines, you know, all over the place, and we, you know, the general public, it's a different view, and views change as well as the view that you see, as it were. I do have a concern about the noise, and I would want to ensure that the condition with regards to noise is really tight, and that there is somebody that has looked at that noise assessment. And when I say somebody, I mean a noise expert that is on behalf of the council, to ensure that I don't understand the relevance of noises. I would rely on an expert, so I want to know that the noise assessment is, and it's not just kind of, you know, loud bang noises or anything. It's sort of general background hum and impact on amenity. So I'd want the wording of that condition to be really strong, were it that the committee approves this application. So my main concern is noise, and also the landscaping, and I would like to see, you know, again, if the committee were to approve, that there was really strong landscaping to I would like to say hide some 12-metre sheds, but...
Can I just comment on that point? Okay, so I want to go to the vote, but I think the landscaping and noise has come up a few times, and in the you know, we have limited words here, so can you give us absolute reassurance that you've heard what we've said, and if it is approved, that the noise and the landscaping are sort of, you know, on turbocharged in terms of getting council attention?
Yeah, absolutely. So taking the noise first, Bron has just been sending me some of the wording so that we're looking at requirement of the noise assessment by a competent individual. So we would look at their qualifications. If it's, you know, just written on a Word document, we're going to query that. So we're going to look for their qualifications. We'll do that with environmental health, that it's got background sound levels, 1 hour on LA 90 during the day and 15 minutes LA 90 during the night. So they're quite tight, specific noise levels that have come in through that request, and that we would do that with environmental health. So yes, I think it might need some tweaking from what I've heard, but I think we've got the beginnings of a condition to work to that. And similarly with the landscaping, we would expect that before commencement, and we would expect that implementation, you know, the first landscaping season following commencement. So as soon as you've got...
Okay, well that's as much commitment as we're going to get today. So I think on that basis, we'll go to vote, see where that takes us, see what the next steps may or may not be.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just confirming that's been proposed by Councillor Humphreys and seconded by Councillor Mayer. Is that right? Yeah, thank you. So that vote is now in progress. Thank you, members. That is 4 votes for and 4 votes against. So we are...
It is 4.
Thank you. Chair's casting vote means that has now been carried. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, so we close the meeting at 1:12. Thank you very much.